Chapter 928. Huh? What's going on today? Why aren't these crystal lights lit up? Roland tilted her head and looked not far away. She was a young and energetic half-elf. She usually slept until 10 o'clock in the evening, and the crystal lights in Mordor City were usually turned off at 10 o'clock. Sometimes she stared at these crystal lights at night, or chatted with another little girl downstairs. The chandeliers were turned off very early today. They were all turned off around 8 o'clock. This had never happened before. However, other than the lighthouse at the port, there was no light anywhere else. The little girl had a feeling that something was going to happen tonight. The little girl tiptoed down the balcony to take a look, but as soon as she landed, she found that her father was looking at her with a smile on his face. Oh no. Roland forgot that her father used to be a very powerful thief. Although he changed to a proper job after moving to Mordor City, she never succeeded in sneaking out of the house in the middle of the night. What are you doing? Her father was rarely angry, but Roland still lowered her head in fear. She quickly said, "The crystal lights are not on today, it's so boring. I want to take a walk in the square." "Pa," her father patted her on the head and said, "Come back with me. There's something very important in the city hall today, and all the crystal lights are turned off. It's also forbidden to approach the central square." After saying that, he grabbed her back as if she was a little chick. Mordor City, Central Square. Usually, there would still be people moving around the square at night. Occasionally, one could see shy boys and girls secretly holding hands and flirting. However, there was no one to be seen today because there were groups of soldiers patrolling nearby. High Priest. An officer-like man walked to the front of the temple and bowed. "Her Excellency Gloria said that she is ready." The High Priest's expression was very calm. He nodded and said, "I see. Send someone to cut off the energy transmission of the lighthouse, and then concentrate the energy of the elemental furnace to the portal." Ziz. A faint arc appeared, which was a phenomenon caused by a high concentration of magic energy. The lighthouse in the port of Mordor in the distance flickered a few times and then went out. Then the crystal in the central square suddenly became bright, and all the crystal pipes appeared with a lavender light, directly connecting to the laboratory. A cold mechanical voice sounded. "Mana transfer commencing. Lock onto the teleportation beacon of the astral boundary. Interplanar teleportation plan activated. Begin the test." A clay golem was activated by the energy and walked out of the golem factory with heavy steps, disappearing into the white light of the portal. Falling voice rang out again. "Transmission complete. Testing the teleportation beacons." The teleportation deviation was over 20 kilometers. Recalibrate the teleportation beacon. Gloria's silhouette was busy on the side, and the Fallen Witch was also adjusting a huge pile of alchemy runes near the portal. After more than 10 minutes, the second test began again. Soon, the second clay golem disappeared from the portal. Falling mechanical voice sounded. "Transmission complete. Testing the teleportation beacons." The teleportation deviation was about 10 meters. The test was complete. Lock onto the space waymark. Activate Magic Golem Army teleportation. It was easy for errors to occur during interplanar teleportation. Even legendary mages were prone to accidents. The premise was to provide 2 teleportation beacons, so that even if there was a deviation, it could be corrected. With the current technology of Mordor, the deviation of the teleportation position could be controlled within 30 meters. Gloria also stood up at this time, and she said to Fallen Witch beside her, "Mother, you can start the transmission. Let me go this time, okay?" Fallen Witch raised her head and said, "You have to stay in Mordor. Those officials respect and obey you very much. So let me go to the mechanical realm this time." "Okay. There's nothing to fight about. Start the transmission of the Golem Army." As the tower genie operated, a huge secret door appeared under the Golem factory. Then, activated clay golems walked out one after another. Mordor City had been operating the Golem factory at full strength for a long time. A small part of the golems were used for construction, and the other part was kept in the warehouse as an army. Clay golems were the easiest golem to make. Soren brought out more than 1,000 of them from the desert ruins, and Mordor City produced thousands of them themselves. This reserve was to deal with the attack of the Devil Legion. However, this wave of attack did not choose to attack Mordor City, so these golem legions could be transferred to other places. More than 3,000 clay golems lined up neatly and entered the portal, followed by hundreds of stone golems. These two types of golems were the most common. The steel golems had to wait for the metal ore from the bottomless abyss to be refined. On the other side, near the construction factory in the mechanical realm, a simple portal was also completed. A clay golem first appeared in front of Soren, and then after 10 minutes, more clay golems began to walk out of the portal. The mobility is still not enough. The alchemy tree in Mordor City still needs to be climbed up. Soren looked at the clay golems in front of him and frowned slightly, although cross-plane teleportation is already possible. But the mobility of this teleportation method is still too poor. The Arcane Empire could perform zero-delay teleportation on the battlefield. The Godslayers who attacked the Queen of Spiders could also perform zero-delay battlefield airdrop. The teleportation technology of Mordor City must be further improved. Soren's ideal cross-plane battle was to directly airdrop the golem army into the city of the Fermi Ants. But at present, there were not enough alchemy trees in Mordor City, so they could only teleport to the mechanical realm first and then gather the troops to attack. In this way, the mobility would be reduced a lot. When the Arcane Empire dared to intervene in the Abyss Blood War to compete for resources from the demons and demons, they relied on this zero-delay teleportation technology. The research of the portal was one thing, and the energy supply was another. In order to activate the cross-plane portal, Mordor City even turned off the energy supply to the lighthouse. Thousands of clay golems were assembled, and then the golems began to assemble. The figures of Thaling 1 and Thaling 5 appeared, and they bowed slightly to Soren and said, "Lord Shadow, our golem army has been assembled." On the other side, near the golem factory, 3 squares of different sizes had been formed. Because the command system of the golems was different, the forces of Thaling could only be controlled by them. These golems were also very interested in the fallen floating city of the Arcane Empire. They hoped to do some research after defeating the Fermi Ants. A large number of forces were gathered together. In the end, Mordor City sent out more than 3,000 clay models, more than 800 stone golems, more than 100 steel golems, and 12 diamond golems. The time of attack was chosen to be night. The reason was that the golem army itself was not made of flesh and blood. Night had little impact on them, and they had a clear advantage in battle. As the figure of the fallen which appeared from the portal, the army of Mordor City had all arrived. Thaling 3 activated a portal on the edge of the gear, which could directly lead to the city occupied by the Fermi Ants. "Let's start." Soren nodded and handed over the command of the golem army to the fallen witch, and then transferred his mind to the bottomless abyss. This time, the battle was against tens of thousands of Fermi Ants. All creatures of this race were at the standard of professionals. Even the workers of the Fermi Ants were equivalent to level 3 to 5 fighters. The challenge level of the mechanical realm was so high, largely because of these ubiquitous Fermi Ants. Soren also needed a reserve force. At this time, he needed to use the power of the demon incarnation, and if necessary, he might even have to airdrop a demon army to the battlefield. The mighty golem army began to move. Such a large-scale operation could not be hidden from the enemy, so when the golem army teleported near the city of the ants, they had already been discovered by the enemy. ZZZ. Accompanied by sounds similar to the insects, a large number of Fermi ants gathered. This race was the standard characteristic of the insects. Their individual consciousness was very weak. The strongest will of the entire race was the Ant Queen. The other Fermi ants were infinitely close to puppets, and could be controlled by the Queen's mind at any time. Heavy footsteps sounded. The clay golems, as cannon fodder, began to advance. The golem army did not have much skill in the battle. It was a violent and beautiful picture. One by one, the clay golems, which were about 2 meters tall and weighed more than 500 pounds, directly hit the defense line of the Fermi ants with brute force. Even if they died, they did not have the slightest reaction. They just listened to the order and kept moving forward. Along the way, the corpses of the Fermi ants were crushed. While the enemy army was constantly being destroyed, the number of clay golems was gradually increasing. An insect race with all professionals was not easy to deal with. However, as time passed, a little difference began to appear. That was, the clay golems of Mordor City suffered fewer casualties, while 1/3 of the clay golems of Thaling had been killed. The reason for all this was very simple. It was because the golems of Mordor City were inputted with a special ability when they were being made. Combine defense with offense. After nearly 2 months, Gloria finally cracked a special ability that was inputted into the golems during the Arcane Empire. Chapter 929. If a golem was compared to a robot with low intelligence, then attack and defense was a combat program that was inputted into its body. Alice, the legendary puppeteer from the East, had the greatest credit for cracking this ability, because it was she who completed the core analysis of the golem command. This command could be mass-produced. With the application of soul crystals, basically all the golem puppets in Mordor City had the ability to defend and attack as soon as they left the factory. The additional combat effect of this ability was very obvious because under the attack of the Fermi ants, the loss of the clay golems in Mordor City was reduced by nearly half. Golems, advance. Soren seized the moment when the clay golems broke through the enemy's direction and ordered the more advanced golems to advance. The intelligence of the Fermi ants was only 6 points, which meant that they were similar to a beast. They completely obeyed the orders of the Ant Queen and were almost unafraid of death on the battlefield. Any battle with the Zergs would be a war of attrition. Soren had almost expected this. Otherwise, in the deepest part of the abyss, there would not be so many demons driven to the upper level by the Zergs. In the space below the 450th floor of the abyss, there were many small planes that were occupied by the Zergs. This was something that even the demon Orbis couldn't do anything about. Because there were too many Zergs, and the demon army didn't have much of an advantage against them. As long as the Zergs had resources, they would have endless cannon fodder to consume. Just like the city of the Fermi ants, as long as they were given a month or two, there would be an endless stream of troops inside the city. The golems were like a sharp blade that pierced into the army of the Fermi ants. At this time, behind the city of the Fermi ants, some Fermi soldiers with bigger and stronger shells appeared. At the same time, there were also Fermi ants with psionic spellcasting abilities. They were blessing the other Fermi ants with defensive spells, and at the same time, forming a third line of defense. Lord Shadow. Thaling III's figure appeared beside Soren and bowed slightly. There are too many enemies. If this continues, I'm afraid it will alert the other Fermi ant cities. The Ant Queen here might ask for help from the other Ant Queens. It may even alarm the mother of ants further away. This was indeed a problem. Soren could not help but frown. Although the casualties of the Fermi ants in front of him were already in the thousands. However, the other party showed no signs of retreating at all. Behind them was the mighty army of the ant race. This city had a total of 30 to 50,000 ants, but there were at least 30,000 of them gathered here. They were not ordinary soldiers and seemed to have no fear at all. No matter how serious the casualties were, they would not retreat a single step. Even at the moment of death, they would bite off a piece of the clay golem. If they continued to fight like this, in the end, it would be a pure battle of strength. Even if Mordor could win, they would have to pay a high price. Soren didn't want to see the battle turn out like this. Meteor burst. As if it couldn't bear the losses from the battle, Thaling No. 1 began to prepare a legendary spell. In this case, ordinary level 9 spells were not very useful. At most, they could only kill 100 or 200 Fermi ants, which was insignificant to the scale of tens of thousands of Fermi ants. At present, the only legendary spell that could clear the field was Meteorite, but Meteorite did not distinguish between friend and foe. With one meteorite, all the golems would be destroyed. As the Fermi ants entered the battlefield, the loss of golems gradually increased. Hundreds of clay golems had been destroyed in Mordor, and other golems were also seriously injured. Although the steel golems could form a suppressive force, the queen of the Fermi ants had not appeared yet. It was still too early to send in the main force. Fallen Witch's figure appeared beside Soren. She frowned at the stalemate in front of her and whispered, "The enemy's formation is very dense. I think we can try to mobilize the super mana pulse cannon to fire." The Fermi ants inherited the nature of ants. Those who had seen a large group of ants in action knew that this kind of creature liked to gather in a dense group. Many golems were surrounded by them and dismantled by them. However, such a dense formation was also very easy to become the target of spells and other large-scale attacks. The lethality of spells was limited because the resistance of creatures in the mechanical realm was relatively high. However, if it was replaced by the super mana pulse cannon at the top of the arcane tower, the effect would be very terrifying. Solen's heart skipped a beat and he asked, "Can it be done?" Fallen Witch immediately replied, "It should be possible to try. But you need to use divine power to stabilize the portal." Saint form. Soren directly answered with action. He entered the saint form in an instant, and the golden light shrouded his figure. With the convergence of divine power, Soren's figure emerged in mid-air, and then he pointed to the sky. Space change, shard of divinity. Plane teleportation, shard of divinity. Soren directly used divine power to change the laws of space in the mechanical realm. Only gods with lesser divine power could temporarily change the laws. This was something that even legendary wizards could not do. A portal was opened. The other side was connected to the arcane tower in the city of Mordor. Gloria was now on standby at the top of the arcane tower. With the guidance of the high priest, the mana pulse cannon at the top of the arcane tower was aimed at a stable portal that appeared directly in front of them. The mana pulse cannon is charging. 10. 9, 8. 7, 6. 5, 4. 3, 2. 1. Charging complete. Target locked. Fire. A dazzling light shot out. The energy cannon shot directly into the portal, and then the next moment, it appeared inside the mechanical realm through the portal. Soren had only seen this tactic last time when the Godslayer dealt with the Queen of Spiders. This was the first time he used it. Boom! The dazzling and blazing light beam directly turned the 5 clay golems into dust. Then, it crushed all the Fermi ants in its path and vaporized them. In the blink of an eye, a 15-meter-wide, 3-kilometer-long vacuum zone appeared in front of the battlefield. All the Fermi ants behind it, whether they were workers, soldiers, or guards, were vaporized. The final energy of the super-arcane crystal pulse cannon bombarded a beehive-shaped building. After leaving a huge hole, the entire building collapsed. The battlefield was dead silent. This cannon directly killed thousands of Fermi ants and instantly divided the enemy into 2 parts, and the center was a dead zone without any life. At this moment, even Soren was a little shocked. Because the attack of the mana pulse cannon was too terrifying. He felt that in his non-divine state, he was afraid that even with the divine shield, he could only withstand 1 or 2 attacks at most. No wonder the spellcasters during the Arcane Empire dared to challenge the gods. The steel golems and diamond golems can advance. The power of this cannon seemed to have caused the fearless Fermi ants to panic, and it was more likely that the ant queen who controlled them felt fear. As the diamond golem stepped into the battlefield, the situation immediately became clear. The diamond golem had a damage reduction of 80%, so the Fermi ants could only deal a limited amount of damage to it. It was completely unhindered, and the attacks of more than 10 Fermi ants could only scratch the surface of the diamond golem. Buzz buzz buzz. Just when Soren thought that the battle was over, a strange vibration suddenly came from the back of the Fermi ant city. Then, a black shadow appeared in the distant sky, and at this moment, it was flying towards Soren's location at high speed. Upon closer inspection, it was a large group of Fermi ants, but they were different from the other ants. These Fermi ants had a pair of wings on their back. There's actually a flying troop. Soren's expression was a little surprised. It seemed that his attack made the ant queen feel a deep sense of crisis. The target of these flying ants was obviously Soren, and it seemed that they were going to carry out a decapitation operation. Hundreds of flying ants quickly approached. However, Soren did not even have the thought of retreating, because he was the most powerful one on the whole battlefield. It was simply a dream for the ant queen to decapitate him. Elemental Legion. Demon Incarnation. With the opening of a portal, an elder wind elemental appeared, followed by a giant fire elemental, and finally a fire elemental elder. At the same time, the surrounding temperature rose sharply, and a raging fire suddenly appeared on the ground. Then a demon more than 3 meters tall appeared, holding a giant beheading sword in one hand and a flame whip in the other. As soon as it appeared, it roared, "Die! Insects!" Large fireballs flew out one after another. Then, this powerful Baler flew into the air. Its broad demonic wings were covered with raging fire. It did not need any skills at all. It directly turned into a large fireball and rushed into the dense flying ants. With a swing of the beheading sword, the ant queen was split in half. The flame whip rolled and several flying ants fell. The demon Sauron's attack did not care about any rules at all. It was the most brutal way of fighting. He relied on his Baler form to bully these winged ants. Plop! 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 Sauron with his demonic wings was simply the overlord of the sky. Perhaps only dragons were qualified to fight with him in the sky. As for these winged Furmi ants, no matter how many there were, they were just a group of insects. Before they even got close to Sauron, their bodies had already begun to burn. Many ants who desperately rushed to the side of the demon incarnation had only attacked once before they were completely roasted and fell from the sky. This was not a battle at all. P.S. In between writing, I played an online game called The Undefeated Legend, and got a Durex. He said that he would send it to me in 2 days. Chapter 930. Fire Baler. Not only Thaling No. 1 was surprised by the sudden appearance of the demon incarnation, but even the Fallen Witch was surprised. However, she quickly thought of something and murmured, "No wonder the ores provided by Motor City contained a lot of materials from the abyss. So you've already reached out to the lower planes?" There were diamond golems below and fire balers above. The defense line of the Furmi ants finally collapsed completely. All that was left was a futile resistance. They were using their lives to stop the advance of the golems. "What do you want? Outsider. Why do you have to kill us all?" Just when Soren thought that victory was in sight and that he would soon be able to conquer the beehive city of the Furmi ants, a telepathic message connected to him. At the same time, a gentle but slightly panicked female voice was heard, "My people didn't attack you. They're just acting according to their nature. Can't you let us live?" At this point, the voice was full of pleading. Then, the Furmi ants in front of him scattered in all directions. Finally, a huge ant queen appeared under the protection of a group of guards. Ordinary Furmi ants only weighed 60 pounds, while Furmi soldiers weighed 160 pounds, which was the same as an adult man. However, the guards in front of him weighed at least 1,500 pounds. Their bodies looked like alien creatures, and they could spit corrosive poison attacks. In a head-on battle with the golems, they weren't at a disadvantage at all. As for the queen of the Furmi ants, her strength was quite astonishing. She retained the characteristics of the ruler of the Zerg. Her innate strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, and charm were all above 20 points. She was a typical supernatural magical creature when she was born. A queen of the Furmi ants could easily have a level of psionic power that was not weaker than a legendary spellcaster. Unlike the other queen of the Furmi ants, the one in front of Soren seemed to have the ability to move on her own. However, the Furmi ants in front of him were too fat and lost the ability to move. They even needed the support of the colony to eat. The queen of the Furmi ants in front of him was close to 10 feet long and 4 feet tall. She weighed about 3,500 pounds. The characteristic of the Furmi ants was collective consciousness. The Ant Queen relied on this to control the development of the entire race. Although there seemed to be a large number of Fermi ants, they were scattered into individual consciousnesses. There were only a few Emperor-level Fermi ants in the entire machinery realm who had independent thoughts. The Ant Queens lacked the ability to move, but they could easily cast spells that were around the ninth circle. Their spellcasting abilities were equivalent to warlocks, and they also had psionic characteristics. The Queen of the Fermi ants had a very powerful telepathic ability. They could communicate telepathically with any intelligent creature within 50 kilometers. Soren wasn't the only one who received the Ant Queen's message. The others must have received the message as well, because the Fallen Witch turned around to ask for Soren's opinion. The situation of the battle was already very clear. Eliminating these Fermi ants would at most increase the casualties. If this kind of loss was needed, Mordor City could afford it. Floating City. Soren's figure flew to the front of the battle line and looked down at the Ant Queen in front of him. After pondering for a moment, he said, "I need everything in the floating city that fell in your city." The Fermi Ant Queen stared at Soren and immediately said, "No problem. Your Excellency. I can feel your greatness. I'm willing to give you everything in the floating city. But I beg you to let us live." Soren shook his head and slowly said, "The floating city is just a trophy we need. According to the law of the astral plane, you are now my prisoner, so you have to pay a price if you want to regain your freedom." Hearing Soren's words, the Fermi Ant Queen's voice suddenly became a little uneasy. "What price?" Soren raised his fingertips, and with a trace of divine light, a point of divinity condensed into a golden light on his palm. He sent the golden light to the Ant Queen and slowly said, "Accept it. I give you freedom. At the same time, in the future, it will help you become the mother of all ants and the real Ant Queen." The light of divinity was so tempting. At this moment, the Ant Queen finally knew Soren's identity. She felt fear but also full of desire because a little divinity was so precious to mortals. She struggled to resist the temptation of divinity. Because she understood one thing very well. If she accepted this divinity, then from now on, she would be completely under Soren's control. But she had no choice now. In the end, the Fermi Ant Queen bowed her head and accepted the golden divinity. The moment the divinity entered her body, it began to transform her. Her body was shrouded in a faint golden light, and the shell on her body became brighter, as if something had changed from its essence. Heal serious wounds. A divine spell was suddenly cast from the Ant Queen's body. Soren's divinity gave her some of the abilities of a priest. As the divinity was integrated into her body, the connection between Soren and her became closer. As long as Soren wanted to, he could control her mind at any time. It was not shameful to submit to a god, even a god more powerful than the mother of all ants. "My lord. Great Shadow Lord. Please come with me. What you want is inside." The moment she accepted the divinity, the Fermi Ant Queen knew Soren's identity. She humbly bowed her head to Soren, and then led Soren into the ant nest. The fallen witch's expression was a little hesitant, but after Soren nodded, she followed. Soren's brand of divinity had absolute control over the Ant Queen. In this case, there was no way for any accidents to happen. Thaling 1 and Thaling 3 also followed. They were very curious about what else was preserved in the floating city. For high-level constructs, the civilization of the arcane empire that created them was full of countless secrets. This is the furnace of elemental fission. The fallen witch was pleasantly surprised after entering the core palace of the ants. Because of the huge energy radiation, the center of the ant palace was the well-preserved energy center of the floating city, which was the elemental fission device that operated the floating city. It was still operating and did not explode, but some parts could no longer be activated. "My lord. There are still some things scattered around the city. I'll send someone to bring them over right away." The Ant Queen respectfully stayed in front of Soren, looking like a tamed pet. Many ant workers seemed to have forgotten the battle just now, and immediately moved all kinds of things inside the ant palace. At the same time, there were also a lot of metal, jewelry, and unknown items. My lord. These are your servants' offerings to you. The Ant Queen's expression was a little flattering. She humbly lowered her head and said, "They are not of much use to me. However, they should be able to help my lord's church grow." The intelligence of the entire ant race was added to the Ant Queen. Soren looked at her, raised his hand, and put another point of divinity on her. He nodded and said, "Very good. Since you are so thoughtful, I will not be stingy with my rewards. What you need to do next is to strengthen your race as much as possible. When your race is strong enough to challenge the mother of ants, I will help you to take her divinity." The Ant Queen was ecstatic when she heard this. On this side, Soren was communicating with the Ant Queen, but on the other side, the fallen witches and tower spirits were all immersed in the study of new things. Thaling was also a technical maniac. At the moment, they were looking at the well-preserved parts everywhere. At the same time, the fallen witch and Thaling number 1 were each holding a record and counting the degree of preservation of the floating city. Because the floating city had been transformed by the ant race, its appearance had changed greatly, but there were still many things preserved inside. They needed to count them before deciding what could be transported away. Motor City. In a library that covered an area of hundreds of acres, 3 witches were registering at the door. Lena. A young witch with a beautiful face greeted her companion, then asked, "How's your research on elemental fusion and mutation going? I heard that after you finish it, you can borrow the library's information on level 6 spells and metamagic abilities, right?" The witch named Lena raised her head, pushed her golden glasses with her white fingers, then curled her lips and said, "It's not that easy. This is one of the research contents of the elemental furnace. I think it will take another half a month to write it. How's your golem construct modification and ability research going?" Hearing the other's words, the witch who spoke first also shook her head in frustration and said, "Not so fast. The things here are more difficult than the ones in the north. If it weren't for the 50 contribution points, would never choose this project. By the way, Brinley, what research have you been doing recently?" The last witch looked a little silent, but she was holding a thick stack of books in her hand. She raised her head and said lightly, "City water supply system layout. It's not a magic research project. It's a task issued by the City Hall. Motor City wants to transform and build a more perfect water supply system. I hope to unify the daily water use of all residents. I made a preliminary plan to bring water from the river and then set up an elevated canal. However, the City Hall didn't approve it. They hope that the final layout can be simpler and more effective, and it can operate for at least 50 years. I've been looking through the information recently to see if I can get it out this week." The 2 female companions next to her nodded and asked carefully, "What about the reward? How many Kindler did the City Hall give you?" The witch curled her lips and said, "If it's Kindler as the reward, then I definitely won't accept it. This is one of the transformation plans given by Her Excellency Gloria to the City Hall. After completing it, I can get 100 contribution points." "Oh my God." The other witch let out a cry of surprise, then quickly said, "There's such a task. So many contribution points. I want to accept one too. After completing one, I'll be qualified to read the Instant Cast Supreme Magic Skill book. P.S. Durex's Invincible Legend invited me to participate in a battle plan. The closed beta will start on July 22nd, and I'll send 10 million Chidian coins to support the original reading. This game is dirty, but it still has some integrity. As for how to send the 10 million Chidian coins, today's Invincible Legend will start. You can go in and create a character first. I think we can make an army of Buddha, with the name Buddha. For example, I'm in the Kai Tian area of the state of Qi, and the name is All Lives Buddha. After logging in on the 22nd, there are cards in the bag. There are a total of 8 prizes, and you can choose the exclusive Chidian coins. It's that simple. Chapter 931. A stable portal opened at the edge of the beehive. Not far away, teams of Fermi and workers were moving things. These large ants that only weighed 70 pounds had amazing strength. Almost every one of them was as strong as a human Hercules. Fallen Witch next to him was in charge of cleaning and counting. At the same time, she was reorganizing the golems and teleporting them back to Motor City. Be careful. These things can't be shaken. Fallen Witch was like a diligent little bee at this moment. She carefully checked everything that was transported. When she noticed Soren approaching, she smiled and said, "I didn't expect there to be an elemental fission device here. It seems that the plan to go to Sigil City can be delayed a lot." Soren smiled and nodded. For mortals, gods were almost omnipotent. There were some areas in the multiverse that could not be touched. Sigil City was one of them. Unless the Lady of Pain, who was in charge of Sigil City, allowed Soren to enter. Otherwise, with Soren's identity as a god, Sigil City was forbidden to him. And it was well known that the Lady of Pain was very unfriendly to most gods. Soren had no contact with her, so it was a very risky move to enter Sigil City. As one of the oldest existences, the Lady of Pain should be stronger than the God of Light in Sigil City. As for leaving Sigil City, no one knew because she never seemed to come out. Soren maintained control of the Ant Queen because of the power of divinity, so there was no problem in leaving everything to the Fallen Witch. Moving the entire floating city was a huge project. Even with the help of the Thaling and the ants, it would take at least a week. Soren couldn't waste a week here, so he was ready to go back to Motor City to prepare for the next test of the Battle Flag Plane and the second phase of the construction of his own kingdom. Shadow Kingdom. After half a month of construction, this barren country after the fusion had undergone a great change. First of all, the power of shadow began to assimilate the kingdom. The gray area formed by the repulsion caused by divine power and priesthood gradually disappeared. The entire God's kingdom no longer looked like two worlds forcibly pieced together. Instead, it gradually showed signs of merging into one. Then there was the interior of the divine kingdom, especially near the reincarnation pool. The number of shadow beings had greatly decreased. Originally, the shadow god would transform himself into a shadow form, so the interior of his kingdom was very close to the shadow plane. However, Soren did not do so, so his kingdom was filled with many bright colors. Some of the shadow beings were killed. The other portion that could be captured and converted were sent into the pool of reincarnation under the heroic spirit's control. They were then converted into Soren's petitioners. Now, a city of about 10 square kilometers had been built in the divine kingdom. Some petitioners had formed an army to patrol and protect it, while the heroic spirits were still in charge of dealing with other dangers in the divine kingdom. Unlike the cities in material planes, the most important thing in a divine kingdom city was its temple. Other than the houses where the petitioners lived, the most eye-catching signs in the city were the temples of various sizes. Every day, petitioners would come to the temples to pray. However, the divine power gathered from their faith would not be sent to Soren. Instead, it would be left in the divine kingdom, turning into a golden light that shrouded the temple. In the future, this power would be used by Soren to expand the size of the divine kingdom. It was necessary to understand the life form of the petitioners in detail. Good believers who were devout in life would be brought to their respective divine kingdoms by the oracles after death to be reborn. This was a new life form, and they would obtain eternity in the divine kingdom. The petitioners were similar to those who entered heaven after death, provided that they believed in a good God. However, they were generally not allowed to leave the divine kingdom. Many petitioners would never be able to leave the divine kingdom in their lifetime. After the death of their god, the petitioners would also die forever. In some cases, the petitioners would also become the petitioners of the other gods who killed their god. Note, this was similar to Soren's reincarnation ceremony of the shadow god's believers. The petitioners were obligated to protect their god, and if necessary, they were even required to participate in the divine war. As a new life form, petitioners needed to breathe and eat, but they were not as dependent as mortals. Some forms of petitioners did not need to eat or breathe because they were essentially life forms transformed from gods. As the cornerstone of the divine kingdom, most petitioners retained the characteristics of mortals. They needed to rest, but they did not need to rest as often as mortals. Petitioners could work for a long time. So many demons and devils liked to imprison petitioners to work as slaves. During peacetime, most petitioners lived a leisurely life. They could do whatever they liked in the divine kingdom and build their own homes and kingdoms. Because they had a long lifespan, any petitioner would have hundreds of years to squander until they were integrated into the divine kingdom and became an eternal entity. Of course, the most important thing for a petitioner was to please the God they served. Most of the time, the petitioners wanted to please the God they believed in exchange for a higher status and more power in the divine kingdom. Eventually, they would be promoted to become a God's messenger or a God's follower. The petitioners in Soren's divine kingdom only needed to rest for 1 or 2 hours every day. They did not need much food because energy could be used to replenish their energy consumption. Of course, food was also a form of enjoyment for them, but it was not necessary for them to survive. This way, the petitioners had enough time to work. They had to prove their worth in the early stages of the divine kingdom in exchange for more opportunities to be promoted. Recently, many petitioners had been promoted to become heroic spirits. Becoming a heroic spirit meant that they would have a higher status, more enjoyment, and a longer lifespan in the future. Every divine kingdom was like a pyramid. Most of the gods who were on the side of order would leave a clear path of promotion in the divine kingdom. Soren's current system was petitioners, heroic spirits, holy spirits, God's messengers, God's servants, God's followers, and God's followers. Every time a petitioner was promoted, there would be a fundamental change. As Soren's servants, some of them had the potential to become gods. Currently, there was an army of about 1,000 people in the divine kingdom. Nearly half of them were heroic spirits, and the rest were petitioners who had enough battle experience before they died. Soren promoted a Holy Spirit priest. She was the half-elf female priest who died in the attack of the abomination. Her nature was far inferior to Milan, but there were too few Holy Spirits in the divine kingdom at the moment. He could only make an exception and promote one. The Holy Spirit priest was responsible for running the city. Currently, all the petitioners' task was to expand their territory, gradually gain control of the divine kingdom, and increase the number of petitioners to prepare for Soren's return to the divine kingdom in the future. Currently, there were a large number of wild petitioners in the divine kingdom. Some of them believed in the original god of the half-elves and rogues, while others believed in the god of shadow. These petitioners were all enemies before they were converted. According to the collected data, there were tens of thousands of petitioners wandering around the divine kingdom. Because this place contained the accumulation of the gods for thousands of years, Soren still needed enough time to convert them. In the evening, teams of troops returned, and at the same time, a large number of petitioners gathered in front of the temple. "My lord, Soren. You are the master of the shadows. You are the protector of the half-elves. You are the master we will always serve and follow. My lord, Soren. You are the incarnation of slaughter. You are the controller of disease. You bring fear to the enemy. You are our supreme ruler." Bursts of prayers echoed. With the prayers of the petitioners, there was a substantial golden light condensed. These converged faith power stayed in the temple and finally turned into real power. Although Soren could not enter the divine kingdom now, he maintained a trace of contact with the divine kingdom. As the number of petitioners increased, his connection with the divine kingdom became closer and closer. It was believed that as the Avatar crisis entered the later stage, the time for Soren to return to the divine kingdom would gradually come. At that time, there would be a whole new world waiting for him. In the end, what the divine kingdom would look like depended on what Soren wanted to build it. Mordor City. When Soren returned to the city of Mordor, the city hall was rebuilding the water supply system of the entire city. The arrival of the witches brought many changes to the city of Mordor. Because they needed contribution points to exchange for information in the library, many witches began to try to accept the tasks issued by the city hall. Most of these quests involved the application of magic in daily life. After Soren returned, he began to work on the transformation plan of the Battle Flag Plain. It was not easy to obtain the divine power of slaughter in reality, because a large part of it was controlled by the god of war, and the slaughter in reality often brought about a decrease in population. Before defeating other gods of slaughter, Soren could not control much power, so the battle flag trial was a very important channel. Soren's initial idea was to add a will circle. Enchantment on the device connected to the battle flag trial would strengthen the willpower of the trial participants and activate it when they quit. This could greatly reduce the chance of death. The second was to expand the scale. The materials from the Githyanki's and the fomites were enough for Soren to expand the number of trial devices. His initial estimate was to expand the scale to about 300 people. If the city of Mordor could guarantee that hundreds of people would participate in the trial every day, Soren would have dozens of more fanatics. This meant that there would be an additional 1 to 3 points of divine power every day. It didn't seem very impressive, but with the accumulation of numbers and time, Soren's divine power would be hundreds more than other gods. The gap in the future was even more unimaginable. P.S. I recently received an advertisement for a game. This book has not been recommended for more than half a year. If it were other authors, I'm afraid they would have hurriedly finished the book and started a new book. Fu too is now gritting his teeth and fighting hard. It's entirely because of your support that he can hold on until now. The summer vacation is here. Those who have pocket money can subscribe to support. By the way, ask for recommendation tickets and public accounts. There will be more tomorrow. Chapter 932. In a blink of an eye, it was almost July. For some reason, the climate had become more and more abnormal recently. A flood broke out in the tropical Amazon jungle, and it was said that it caused a lot of casualties to the fierce female warriors. The south coast was raging with wind, and a terrible tornado even destroyed a town directly. Although many people prayed to the sea goddess, the occasional typhoon and tsunami did not reduce at all, as if the power of the sea goddess was no longer useful at this moment. Even the peaceful Arendelle had a disaster. A terrible earthquake occurred near the king's city. Although the impact on Arendelle was not serious, there were thousands of casualties in another city. The abnormal climate made the gods uneasy. But there was no other way. Even the gods could only find ways to warn and then reduce the casualties as much as possible. During this period of time, even the drows were a lot more honest because there had been earthquakes in the Underdark during this time, and the city was directly buried. The Queen of Spiders could not mess around at this time, so she could only turn her attention to other crises first. Speaking of which, the traces of the demons had decreased a lot during this time. There was no doubt about it. The third wave of the Avatar crisis was over. But the fourth wave, elemental turmoil, had begun. This abnormal climate could only prove one thing, that was, the 4 ancient elemental gods may have come to the mortal world. When they fell, their divine power interfered with the elemental composition of the material plane, and eventually led to the abnormal climate of the entire material plane. It was a calm day. But it was only limited to a short while in the morning. At noon, the clear sky turned into dark clouds, and the wind blew the ships in the port. The fleets that went out to sea today quickly turned back to the port, and the captains were shouting for the sailors to run down the anchors and tie them to the pillars with strong ropes. The high priest stood outside the temple and looked at the distant sky. As a powerful psionic warlock, she seemed to feel something and ordered, "Let the believers gather at the temple. We may need to have a large prayer." At the same time, Soren's figure also appeared at the top of the arcane tower. Gloria soon appeared through the portal. As a legendary witch of prophecy, she had an innate sense of certain things that might happen. What happened? Gloria gently lifted her long hair and stood side by side with Soren. She murmured, "I've been feeling uneasy since this morning, as if something terrible is going to happen." Soren shook his head. "I don't know. But I also have a feeling that something will happen today." The divine sense told Soren that there was a big crisis in Mordor City today. This crisis might destroy Mordor City, so he could only stand here and wait for everything to come. The wind and rain became more and more frightening. The raging wind had passed through the protective barrier of Mordor City. Even with the protection of the temple, some roofs were still lifted. The power of the sea goddess seemed to have lost its effect at this moment. Originally, the sea was under her control, but today, no matter how her priests prayed, the sea near the port of Mordor was still turbulent, and there was no sign of it calming down. Boom! A terrifying vibration came from afar. It should be a place hundreds of kilometers away from Mordor City, but after it was transmitted to Mordor City, it was still a mess. Earthquake? Vivian looked up, and the next moment, she appeared above the arcane tower. The little girl had recently been learning how to become a god, and Saruman was also learning with her. At present, Vivian was only one step away from becoming a god, but she needed to learn a lot, far more than Soren needed to master. You guys stay here. Soren did not have the energy to pay attention to other things at this time. His figure turned into a golden light, and then appeared above Mordor City. Saint form. With a golden beam of light made of divine power rising, the sky above Mordor City was covered by a layer of transparent energy field. Gloria also stood up and said to Vivian next to her, "Vivian, come and help me activate the magic lock. This storm is amazing. I'm afraid it will cause great damage to Mordor City." The arcane tower rose. In the lavender light of magic, Gloria started the elemental furnace, and at the same time, an invisible protective force expanded rapidly, and soon covered the entire city of Mordor, resisting the increasingly terrible storm outside and reducing the damage suffered by Mordor City. This is not a natural power at all. Saruman's expression was solemn, and he quickly rushed to the temple area to see what he could do to help. At this time, near the port of Mordor City, just 10 meters away, the waves were already 7 or 8 meters high, and some boats that did not have time to return sank directly. And inside the energy shield, countless people watched all this in horror, looking at the scene outside as if it was the end of the world. Some people turned their heads to look at the golden figure above Mordor City, and they were glad that they had the protection of the gods at this moment. Countless believers gathered automatically. Many believers who were not Soren also came near the temple and prayed under the guidance of the priest. This was a disaster. A terrible disaster like the end of the world. At this moment, as mortals, they had no power to resist. They could only pray devoutly that the gods could shelter them through this crisis. My Lord Soren, you are the master of shadows. You are the master of Mordor. You are the protector of the half-elves. My Lord Soren, you are the keeper of order. You are the only true god of the rogues. Your enemies will have nowhere to hide. My Lord Soren, your name will become sacred in the mortal world. You led us through the crisis. You gave us a stable and orderly life. You are the master of shadows. You are a wise ruler. You are the protector of the half-elves. Killing will make you stronger. The death of the enemy will spread your glory. Your kingdom will protect our souls. When death comes, the servants who serve you will be reborn in your kingdom. My Lord Soren, you will lift up your kingdom. Turn into the stars in the sky. The majestic sounds of prayer converged into a single sound. In the end, it turned into a pale golden divine power that shrouded the top of the temple and transferred to Soren's golden avatar to resist the terrible storm outside. The shaking gradually stopped. It seemed that the earthquake in the distance had ended, but Soren did not feel relieved. Instead, his face became more dignified. Because he felt that the crisis that would destroy Mordor was getting closer and closer. He frantically extracted the power stored in the temple, and then directly turned himself into divine form. A golden giant of hundreds of meters high appeared over Mordor. At this moment, even Gloria could not help but tremble, because she felt the gap between herself and Soren at this moment, the huge gap between a mortal and a true god. Soren had never mobilized his divine power so crazily. But he knew that he had no way out at this moment, because in a farther place, he saw a wave hundreds of kilometers long on the horizon by the sea. Tsunami. Soren finally knew where the source of the disaster that had been bringing him the destruction of Mordor was. The 4 elemental gods fell into the mortal world, and their divine power directly changed the climate of the material plane. The earthquake just now was either a volcanic eruption or a continental shelf movement. Because Mordor was located in the Outer Islands, when such a disaster happened, the consequences were even more terrifying. Time passed little by little. Countless faith power gathered on Soren's body, and the situation at this moment could not be changed by any legendary profession. The only thing that could change all this was the gods. The terrible tsunami was gradually approaching. As if the end of the world was coming, the entire sky of Mordor was dark. This time, the tsunami wavelength reached hundreds of kilometers. Not only Mordor, but the entire south coast, the entire outer islands, and the entire Amazon rainforest were within the scope of this tsunami. But at this time, Soren had no energy to care about other places. Mordor was the foundation of everything. And according to the location of the tsunami, Mordor should be the most severely damaged place. The terrible tsunami was approaching at an amazing speed. When it appeared in the sight of the residents of Mordor, countless people screamed in horror. A huge wave of more than 100 meters high approached the coastline. Such a height was enough to easily destroy everything. The energy it contained could flatten the entire city of Mordor and turn all of Soren's efforts for so long into nothing in an instant. At this moment, Soren could not help but feel lucky that he happened to be in Mordor at this moment. In the face of such a terrible natural disaster, the power of any mortal was useless. Only the gods could fight against it, and only the gods could use their power. Divine form. Soren's figure took a step forward, and in the blink of an eye, he had turned into a golden giant more than 300 meters high. He looked like the ancient Titan. Change space, power of divinity. Change reality, power of divinity. Change form, power of divinity. Regional divine shield. Soren's figure appeared over the port of Mordor. He opened his arms as if he wanted to hold up the whole sky. A golden divine shield opened with him as the center, covering the entire island of Mordor in an instant, and the monstrous wave of more than 100 meters in front of him had arrived. The life and death of Mordor would be destroyed at this moment of collision. P.S. First update. Please recommend me. Chapter 933. In front of the catastrophe, the power of mortals was so small. Only at this moment did mortals feel the greatness of the gods. And the great power of the true gods. Soren's golden giant directly cut the terrible tsunami from the middle. In the collision of huge energy, the golden divine shield kept shaking, but there was no sign of breaking. On the other side, the tsunami with a wavelength of hundreds of kilometers and the residual waves from the island of Mordor were being consumed by the divine shield, and finally turned into countless waves. The moment the tsunami passed, Soren's huge golden figure shook, and then his body appeared as if he had exhausted all his strength and fell from the sky. Gloria appeared beside him in an instant and quickly hugged Soren, who was falling from the sky. As the terrible tsunami passed, the city of Mordor gradually returned to calm. Soren's face looked a little pale at the moment. He seemed to be a little weak and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little exhausted. Send someone to the sea temple immediately. This tsunami will not end so easily. Only the sea goddess can stop the disaster." Gloria hugged Soren tightly and whispered, "I'll send someone now. Don't talk, you need to have a good rest." The divine power of the entire city of Mordor was exhausted. All the temples lost their pale golden brilliance. Soren almost used up all the stored divine power when he was in the form of a true god. But after the terrible disaster was over, the entire island of Mordor burst into cheers. Then, a little bit of golden divine brilliance gathered again. With the joy of the believers after surviving the disaster, the ripples of divine power appeared again over the temple. At the same time, on the coastline of Port Tylon, the terrible tsunami was gradually approaching the entire south coast. Countless priests of the sea temple gathered, and many Naga sirens also appeared on the sea. A golden figure rose from the bottom of the sea. The goddess of ocean held a trident and turned into a 100-meter-tall giant on the sea. She looked at the huge waves in the distance and frowned as if she was thinking about something. When the huge waves gradually approached, she waved the trident in her hand and slashed forward. An invisible divine power spread. Under the effect of the sea, the huge waves of hundreds of meters high directly reduced by more than 20 meters. The gods were all in the form of saints. In the face of such a terrible disaster, even the sea goddess could not eliminate it without entering the form of a god. A dazzling brilliance appeared on the golden trident. The goddess of ocean gritted her teeth and waved her hand again. The terrible waves then shrank down by more than 30 meters. Now the height of the tsunami was only about 50 meters, and most of its power had been dissolved by her. Storm Lord. How long are you going to watch? Until the entire Amazon rainforest is submerged by the tsunami? As if she had consumed a lot of divine power, the tone of the goddess of ocean was not friendly. She said to the sky covered by dark clouds, "Let the storm consume part of the power of the tsunami. Otherwise, thousands of your believers will die." Rumble. It was accompanied by thunder. The figure of the storm lord appeared in the sky. He frowned and looked at the tsunami in the distance. Then he turned into a golden giant, opened his own power, and smoothed out the tsunami with the power of the storm. If he had not fallen into the mortal world, he might not have been willing to do so much for the mortals. Because the gods had a long time to cultivate new believers, but now he had fallen into the material plane, so the importance of the mortal believers was self-evident. The intensity of the tsunami was reduced again. But neither the sea goddess nor the storm lord wanted to consume too much of their divine power in this disaster because it meant that they would be very weak for a period of time in the future. So when the tsunami approached the south coast, it was still tens of meters high, enough to easily destroy everything in the coastal area. The sea goddess and the storm lord seemed to have given up on ordinary people. This intensity of the tsunami was almost a death situation for ordinary people, but for many powerful professionals, the chances of survival were still very high. They did not want to consume too much of their divine power, so it was enough to reduce the intensity of the tsunami to a level where it would not hurt the foundation. If they wanted to completely wipe out this tsunami, it would be difficult for them to do so even if they exhausted their power. But just when the sea goddess and the storm lord seemed to be ready to give up, a bright light suddenly appeared in the distant sky, and then the sun penetrated the heavy fog and sprinkled directly on the whole earth. God of light. A golden figure fell from the light, and behind him was the light of the sun. The shadow of mountain paradise appeared behind him. He looked at the gods in front of him and slowly said, "This is a disaster brought by the gods. It should not be transferred to the mortals." There was no sadness or joy. The god of light finished this sentence very calmly, and then turned into a golden figure and pointed his finger at the tsunami approaching the coastline. The surging divine power emerged. It was as if the space laws of the entire material plane had been changed at this moment. The mountain paradise behind the god of light seemed to have become solid. Under the terrifying power that was so strong that it made the other gods pale, the tsunami that was approaching countless mortals and could bring destruction to them at any time was wiped out by the god of light just like that. Shocking. Unimaginable terrible power. A tsunami with a wavelength of hundreds of kilometers and a height of tens of meters was directly wiped out by the god of light with his divine power. Is this the great divine power? The sea goddess was full of shock, because even if it was not because of the Avatar crisis, it was impossible for her, who was in charge of the sea, to wipe out such a disaster so easily. At this moment, she felt a huge gap, which was more unimaginable than a great divine power. The sea goddess humbly lowered her head. Even the furious storm lord was silent, because he also realized that there was a huge gap between himself and the god of light. They were both gods with great divine power, but the power that the god of light had just shown was far beyond his estimation. That was a realm that only a great divine power could reach. It was a power that could change a world with a raise of the hand. The figure of the god of light gradually dissipated. It was as if this matter was nothing to him. Perhaps for gods at this level, they were not only concerned about the material plane, but the changes of the whole multiverse. The terrible disaster was over. But the shock left by the god of light was still fermenting. The storm lord left silently, and no one knew what he was thinking. The sea goddess sank to the bottom of the sea again. As a god very close to a great divine power, she had a real understanding of the great divine power at this moment. At this moment, she could not help but think of Father Oak, who had chosen to sacrifice himself to save the entire material plane. Perhaps the power he showed at that moment was more shocking than it was today. Soren was also watching all this silently. He was not surprised that the God of Light would finally make a move, because it was Father Oak and the God of Light who worked together to break the dust that shrouded the material plane. No matter how to evaluate the God of Light, he was always a god with his own principles, and he would never sit back and watch the material plane be destroyed. What a huge gap! As the figure of the God of Light disappeared, Soren's spirit also returned to the city of Moder. As an old god who had existed for a long time, the strength of the God of Light was difficult for Soren to estimate. Because as early as the ancient times, the God of Light was the sun god. Later, he fell and was reincarnated as the Light of Dawn, Luashanda, and then merged with the power of Mountain Paradise to become the God of Light. God knew how much divinity such an ancient god had accumulated. Unless Soren gathered the power of the three gods of death, it was impossible for him to fight against him. If there was a classification of the great divine powers, then the God of Light was undoubtedly the one closest to the great divine power. In terms of quantity alone, the power of the God of Light should be equivalent to that of 3 other greater divine powers. At present, there should be no one among the gods who could fight with him. Even the Lady of Night should not be his opponent. The only one who was qualified to fight with him head-on was probably the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. One was the embodiment of eternal justice. The other was the ultimate source of evil. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis seemed to be destined to have a fierce collision. What was the cause of such a huge disaster? Gloria's voice sounded in Soren's ears. What had just happened seemed to make her feel a lingering fear. Soren turned to look at her and said slowly, "The 4 elemental ancient gods have fallen to the mortal world." Before all this broke out, Soren was not sure whether the 4 elemental ancient gods had fallen to the mortal world. But at the moment of fighting against the terrible tsunami, Soren was sure that the 4 elemental ancient gods must have fallen now. Water, fire, earth, and air. The 4 elemental ancient gods fell to the mortal world, and the creatures in the elemental plane lost control. The violent power led to the elemental turmoil. Soon, the material plane would usher in the first batch of violent elemental creatures. The 4 elemental ancient gods rarely left the elemental plane. On the one hand, they did not like to move around, and on the other hand, they needed to suppress the power of the elemental plane. Because the 4 elemental planes represented their own extremes, without the power of the elemental ancient gods to control, the power of the 4 elemental planes was easy to be imbalanced. And the final result was to affect all the elemental creatures. It was like if the queen of the ants died, all the Fermi ants would lose control and go berserk. PS1, second update. PS2, I don't know if the character you created in Invincible Legend is right. It is said that someone's nickname is Futu, update quickly. Damn. I heard that someone wanted to go to the enemy country to PK me. You underestimate me. Number 22, you are facing the entire Futu army. Chapter 934. The cause of the tsunami was finally figured out. After personally going to the sea to investigate, Soren found that near the whirlpool where the floating city fell, an underwater volcano erupted at an alarming rate. At the same time, there were also a large number of water elementals nearby. These water elementals were very violent and full of aggression. Even the nearby sea monsters were attacked by them. There was no doubt that after losing the control of the elemental god, many elementals without much wisdom entered a period of rage. Most elementals did not have a specific personal consciousness. Generally, when they were promoted to the level of jinn, these elementals would be as smart as humans. As for other low-grade elementals, they basically acted on instinct. Mordor City seemed to have returned to peace. However, after the tsunami disaster, everything in Mordor City had changed a lot. For example, Soren's believers. During this time, the number of Soren's believers had skyrocketed, especially among the half-elves. Almost 90% of the half-elves had become Soren's believers, and there were also a large number of devout believers. Soren never asked for forced belief because belief had to be voluntary. 10 shallow believers were only the power of faith provided by one devout believer, so if there were half-elves who believed in other gods, Soren basically would not interfere. But now the proportion of half-elves who believed in Soren was quite high, and the number of devout believers had directly increased by more than 50%. The so-called devout believers were the kind of believers who would formally pray every day. As for the fanatics, they completely regarded the gods as their everything. The proportion of fanatics in Soren's church had also increased by a lot. And all of this was brought about by the day of the tsunami when he transformed into his true god form and exhausted all the gods to save Mordor City. Although Soren's divine power was almost exhausted at that time, his divine power recovered very quickly. The believers' prayers became several times more active. Soren was recovering his divine power at almost twice the speed in the past, and this momentum continued to increase. In general, Soren's move this time was correct. City Hall. An official came to the City Hall in a hurry, then found the minister in charge of construction and said, "Sir Raffle, something strange has happened near the quagmire in the south." This is the report they sent back. "We don't have a way to deal with it, so we'd like you to pass it to Her Excellency Gloria." The official named Raffle took a look at it, and his expression immediately became solemn. He said in a deep voice, "Got it. I'll report this to Lady Gloria immediately." After he finished speaking, he walked toward the city lord mansion. He didn't have the right to see Gloria directly. He had to wait for an attendant to inform him. Soon, he was brought into a study. Then, Gloria's figure appeared. However, it was not her real body, but an avatar created by the simulacrum spell. Since Soren discovered the spell simulacrum from the ancient ruins, Gloria dealt with most of the things in Mordor City through her avatar. This was also the key to the great arcanists during the Arcane Empire's period. Gloria took a look at the report and said with a solemn expression, "Gravity anomaly? Is it over the quagmire? Okay. I see. You can go now." After that, Gloria's figure disappeared. The next moment, her real body temporarily stopped the experiment in her hand and went directly to Soren's side. After this period of recovery, Soren's exhausted divine power has been replenished a lot. He was now studying the improvement plan of the battle flag plane because the next test was about to begin. When Gloria arrived, he couldn't help but raise his head and said, "What's wrong? You look a bit serious." Gloria handed the report to Soren and said softly, "There's an anomaly near the quagmire in the south. The gravity in that place is distorted, and we don't know what happened yet." Gravity distortion? Soren also became serious when he heard this. He took a look at the report and said, "I see. Leave this to me. You should focus on studying elemental fission." Gloria nodded and then disappeared. At present, whether Mordor City could float or not depended on her and the fallen witch's research progress. If elemental fission was successfully cracked, Mordor City could soon be upgraded to a floating city. Soren fixed the last few runes, then got up and left the battle flag plane. The gravity anomaly must be related to the elemental plane. Under normal circumstances, the gravity of a plane was different. Using the material plane as a standard, the gravity of the lower plane was obviously much higher, and the gravity of the spiritual plane was only about 80% of that of the material plane. Greater teleportation. The entire city of Mordor had been set up with ley line nodes. See Mordor City second phase transformation plan for details. Soren could teleport to any place in Mordor City at any time. As long as he mastered these ley line nodes, any ability that could cast teleportation spells could get a connection point to the teleportation network of Mordor City. When he appeared, a lot of people had gathered near the quagmire. As if they were performing a monkey show, these people's movements were a little slow, as if even walking was very difficult for them. Elemental anomaly. Soren's god-level perception immediately found the problem. The gravity here was about twice that of the material plane. Under normal circumstances, this kind of thing was absolutely impossible because the gravity of the material plane was affected by the elemental channel. The only explanation for the gravity anomaly here was that a channel connected to the Earth elemental plane was formed here. The gravity of the Earth elemental plane was special. As a plane with a challenge rating of 15 or above, the gravity of the Earth elemental plane was about twice that of the material plane. In some places, the gravity may reach more than 10 times. Ordinary people could not even stand, let alone walk. This quagmire originally had a group of sludge monsters, but they had been cleaned up by Mordor City a long time ago. These were the coordinates of the fourth phase of the transformation. Now, within about a kilometer, the gravity was obviously more serious than other places, and it could be felt immediately after entering the range. My lord. Sir Soren. The great lord of shadows. All kinds of names were called. Because of the gravity anomaly here, not only the officials of Mordor City came, but also many witches came to see. Soren waved his hand and said, "Okay. You can go down. I'll take care of it." This level of event was not something that ordinary people could intervene in. At least, only legendary spellcasters with half-planes could deal with it. If there was really a channel connecting to the Earth elemental plane, then Soren would need to use the power of the divine spark to space change, and temporarily seal it completely. Otherwise, as the channel was opened, the Earth elementals would soon find this coordinate, and then Mordor City would have to face elemental turmoil. P.S. First update. Chapter 935. Saint Form. A pale golden light appeared in Soren's sight. He looked down at the quagmire with a diameter of about 1 kilometer from the air. This place was close to a valley, far from the gathering place of the sludge monsters. However, the construction of Mordor could not allow the existence of such unexpected creatures, so they had been wiped out about last year. Now there were no traces of the sludge monsters in this quagmire. At most, there were some small animals. But now there were no small animals, and there were almost no living things in the abnormal gravity range. The only thing that could be felt was that the Earth elemental energy here was very abundant. Casting the spell, Stone to Mud, here should be able to improve the casting effect a lot. Found it. After Soren looked at the area, he finally found the problem. There was a muddy pit that was invisible to the naked eye. It looked a bit like a swamp. There was a very strong energy field below it. It was likely that the passageway was connected to this place. Space change, divinity ability. With a golden light, Soren directly used his divine power to break the illusion covered by the material plane in front of him. Then the overlapping space appeared in front of him, and a deep crack appeared in his eyes. If he wanted to see the situation, he could only enter it. This is the place of buried treasures. This is the wall against all enemies. This is the tomb of the greedy. The elemental plane of Earth was a solid plane made up of rocks, mud, and stones. Travelers who were not alert enough or prepared enough might feel that they were buried alive in this huge, solid tomb, and that their lives would end with them being crushed. His crushed body left a warning for anyone who was stupid enough to follow. Although the elemental plane of Earth had a strong and non-ductile nature, the hardness of the elemental plane of Earth was diverse, from relatively soft soil to heavier and more valuable metal veins. Granite, volcanic rock, marble, fragile crystal, and soft gravel were intertwined together. Rough and huge gem mines were sparsely distributed in this plane. These unpolished gems often tempted greedy people to come to this plane, wanting to dig out gems with minimal effort. Those with this purpose often encountered the natives of the elemental plane of Earth as enemies, and some even left their bones here forever. The elemental plane of Earth was a place that was hostile to creatures from the main material world, but it was not as active as the elemental plane of fire. It was as patient as the Earth itself, and it had all the time in the universe to wait. The 4 elemental planes were born from the origin of the multiverse. This was a place full of endless wealth, and it even had mines far richer than the bottomless abyss. Soren passed through the space crack in front of him, and a light appeared in front of him. He was already in an open gravel area. The gravity here was about twice that of the material plane, and many valuable things could be seen within sight, such as white marble and open-air metal ore. Among the 4 elemental planes, exploring the Earth elemental plane was the most valuable because it was a plane with endless wealth. Lucky people could even find gems as big as a fist on the roadside. There were records of this. There were adventurers who once explored the elemental plane of Earth. One of them wandered for 3 hours, and then found a fist-sized ruby on the roadside. The elemental plane of Earth contained many treasures. It had the densest gem mines in the multiverse, the easiest metal ore to mine in the multiverse, and an abundant amount of almost all kinds of stone. For example, the land in front of Soren was undoubtedly rich in marble, as well as a large number of open-air metal mines near the hills on the side. Gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, almost all of the minerals could be found in the elemental plane of Earth, and they were very easy to mine. They did not even need to go deep underground. There were abnormally rich mineral reserves within 100 meters of the surface. Of course, it was not easy to make a fortune in the elemental plane of Earth. Even the demons did not dare to swagger in. At most, they would sneak in to mine something. Because there were many powerful and dangerous existences in the elemental plane of Earth. For example, the giant Earth elemental that was angrily attacking Soren. Because it was located in the elemental plane, the strength of this giant Earth elemental was at least 30% higher. Its challenge level was close to level 18, and it required half a legendary team to deal with it. And because of the gravity of the elemental plane of Earth, it was very inconvenient for most professions to move here. Death's Hand. Soren did not have the patience to break a giant Earth elemental, so he directly used Death's Hand to take it away. He needed a little time to observe here. It shouldn't be the core area of the elemental plane of Earth, because the gravity is not more than 5 times that of the material plane. Soren looked down at the land in front of him and murmured, "It seems that this area is very valuable. An unusually rich marble mine, as well as a large number of open-air ores. If they can be mined, the strength of the city of Mordor will greatly increase." Unfortunately, Soren just thought about it and gave up. On one hand, it was the danger of the elemental plane of Earth. New elemental life could be born here at any time. Another reason was the gravity here. In the case of twice the gravity, the laborers of Mordor City could not work at all, and Mordor City did not have such technical conditions to rely on golems to mine. It seemed that such a large open-air mine could only be abandoned here. The characteristics of the elemental plane of Earth were that it increased earth spells, weakened air spells, normal time, unlimited size, and could change shape. The sky of this plane was very low. For legendary professions, it was easy to touch the plane barrier, and the core area of this plane was the underground world. There were countless passages under the elemental plane of Earth, and the natives living here were abnormally strong. In the elemental plane of Earth, you must master 2 skills. One was mining, and the other was digging. There was even a book that was circulated among adventurers. It was called Dig Your Way, a survival guide to the elemental plane of Earth. One thing must be mentioned here. Similar to other planes, the elemental plane of Earth was not all in the form of Earth elemental in the eyes of ordinary people. There were also souls that were reincarnated into the elemental plane, as well as the natives who were assimilated by the Earth elemental energy. Their souls were assimilated by the Earth elemental energy, and eventually became similar to half-elemental life. The enemies that could be encountered here were half-Earth elemental Deinonychus, half-Earth elemental Medusa, half-Earth elemental Minotaur, half-Earth elemental Troll, half-fusion lava monster, stone monster, and Earth Djinn, etc. Change space, divinity. Change reality, divinity. Soren returned to the material plane. In order to avoid trouble, he temporarily sealed the crack, but this kind of crack was difficult to completely erase, and he did not know when it would open again. For the time being, Soren could only seal it first and see how to deal with it in the future. After all, the mineral wealth of the elemental plane of Earth was amazing. If possible, Soren still wanted to dig something out of it. Just when Soren finished sealing the elemental crack and was about to return to the city of Mordor, he suddenly froze in place, and then his expression suddenly became very strange. Because just now, just at that moment, he actually perceived the magic net and connected with it again. P.S. Second update. Looking for recommendation tickets, looking for subscriptions. Chapter 936. It only took a moment to connect to the magic net. Soon, Soren lost his connection to the magic net again, as if everything that had just happened was an illusion. Soren's expression was solemn at this moment because he had to determine if he was the only one who had connected to the magic net at that moment, or if everyone was connected to the magic net. If it was the former, it meant that the goddess of magic was most likely hiding in the elemental plane of Earth, and the latter meant that the goddess of magic had returned for some reason. Soren teleported back to Motor City in an instant. As soon as he returned to Motor City, he saw Gloria, who was excited, so there was no doubt that others also felt the magic net. The goddess of magic has just opened the magic net. Gloria looked very excited and murmured, "The goddess of magic did not fall." The reconnection of the magic net means that she is still alive, but for some reason she has temporarily disappeared for a while. The magic net still could not be connected. But the connection just now undoubtedly announced the existence of the goddess of magic. She did not really fall. This was a significant thing for all spellcasters, especially those who had lost their ability to cast spells because of the collapse of the magic net. They would be the strongest supporters of the goddess of magic because only by restoring the magic net could they recover their power. Of course, these people did not care who the goddess of magic was. They only cared about the existence of the goddess of magic and the magic net. As a member of the great divine power, the goddess of magic had amazing influence in the material plane. In addition to the church that served her, the goddess of magic also had a knight order composed of paladins, a small ranger organization, and a group of bards. The existence of the goddess of magic was necessary. Because her clergy itself was a convenience, the real role of the magic net was not just to cooperate with mortals to cast spells. Many worlds did not have the magic net. For example, the influence of the magic net in the bottomless abyss was very small. The shadow magic net dominated the Underdark, and the other upper and lower planes were not covered by the magic net. The final thing of the goddess of magic was actually the divine network. This was something that even Soren could not ignore, because only the divine network above the 9th level of the magic net could help him collect and transform the power of faith. The essence of the magic net was to serve the gods, and the network of faith was the ability that really bordered many places in the multiverse. Even the evil gods could borrow the power of the faith network. No matter what, the reappearance of the weave would definitely have a huge impact on the material plane. The organizations that served the goddess of magic would definitely take action, and the Lady of the Night would probably take action as well. This time, Soren didn't know what would happen in the future. Because the fate of the goddess of magic had been changed by him, Soren had lost all premonitions related to the goddess of magic. However, he wasn't afraid at all. This was because Soren had fought his way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. He had risked his life all the way to apatheicized, so Soren was no longer afraid. He dared to face his fate. Everyone was patiently waiting for news. On the second day after the disappearance of the magic net, Soren was able to connect to the magic net again. However, this time, it wasn't just the network of the mortals. He was even able to connect to the network of the gods. All at once. The power of faith in the entire city of Motor began to gather, and the speed at which Soren transformed and fused divine power was more than twice as fast. This was the convenience of the network of faith. It could greatly reduce the energy and time that Soren needed to deal with faith and prayers. The network of faith only lasted for about half an hour, but there was no doubt that everyone felt its existence. After about half an hour, the magic net disappeared without a trace again. The third time it appeared was 2 days later. This time, the magic net was really restored. The mortal spellcasters regained their ability to cast spells, and the network of faith was running again. However, the goddess of magic had closed all the connections of the magic net above the 16th level, which meant that even the gods couldn't access the highest level of the magic net, including all the prayers to the goddess of magic. She was very weak now. Even if Soren didn't see the goddess of magic, he could feel it. Presumably, the other gods could feel it too. Because it was very rare for the goddess of magic not to respond to prayers, it meant that the priests of the goddess of magic still couldn't use divine spells. The goddess of magic would never do this if the situation wasn't very bad. 3 days passed quietly. The elemental turmoil had officially broken out. The most severely damaged overseas was the tropical Amazon jungle. The raging wind and storm elementals there had caused heavy losses to the fierce Amazonian female warriors. Probably because of the power of the Storm Lord, there was a channel directly connected to the wind elementals in the tropical Amazon jungle. The violent wind elementals set off typhoons and tornadoes from time to time, which directly caused huge losses to the Amazon jungle. The area around Mordor City was also greatly affected. The reason was that it was close to the deep sea. Sometimes, ships in Mordor City might see giant water elementals making waves on the surface of the sea. They would swim directly on the surface of the sea, looking like they would kill anything in their way. Fortunately, the airships of Mordor had entered the regular route, and the wind elementals were no longer raging nearby, so the impact was not very serious. On the mainland, Arendel's losses were not small. The raging ice elementals began to spread near the ice mountains. They drove away the ice trolls, which directly led to the ice trolls attacking human territory. Once the ecological balance was broken, the consequences were a chain reaction. The violent elements directly destroyed the original ecological balance, and many creatures began to migrate in order to avoid the violent elementals. The southwest of the mainland was the worst hit area. Because there were 5 volcanic eruptions in a row in this place. With the volcanic eruptions, there were not only speeches, but also fire elementals and magma elementals who were angry at other creatures. It was said that the elves in that area were forced to migrate, and even an adult red dragon was expelled by the angry fire elemental lord. The elemental turmoil was not just the ordinary elementals. With the opening of the plain channel, other elemental lords that were originally suppressed by the god of fire elemental might also appear in the material plane. Their strength was at least at the level of demigod. As if they felt that the material plane was not chaotic enough at the moment, a big news quickly spread to many places. That was the appearance of the Lady of Misfortune. The twin of destiny, the goddess in charge of the misfortune, divinity, Ben Saba, recently appeared near the south coast, and it was said that she also brought a disaster. P.S. First update. Chapter 937. Ben Saba was an evil and willful goddess. She was narrow-minded and very jealous of her sister. She believed that mortals should worship her as much as they worship the goddess of fortune, or at least, they should respect her verbally. Therefore, although many mortals were afraid of Ben Saba's power and ideas, they had to invite her and welcome her to various formal occasions, such as weddings or coronations, sports or martial arts competitions, and newborn naming ceremonies. Because if they did not invite her, it was possible that the misfortune maiden would launch an endless revenge attack on everyone involved, that is, eternal bad luck. This goddess relied on people's fear to gather faith, and even the gods did not dare to deal with her. Ben Saba's church had a strong desire for abuse. This time, the disaster that broke out near the south coast was related to a special ceremony held by her church. In the church of the misfortune goddess, whenever an important priest passed away or a priest rose in rank in the church, her believers would hold a special ceremony called the Fade. This was a pious ceremony that was rarely held. In the former ceremony, the believers would float the body of the deceased down the river with many lit candles, and then the body would be transformed into powerful undead creatures and randomly sent to any place on the continent to cause large-scale chaos. The latter was called the Ascension. The ceremony was full of low drum music, dancing on hot coals, and various branding and tattooing ceremonies. The cause of the disaster was the Fade. A saint priest in the church of the misfortune goddess died. In the process of this ceremony, the saint priest was transformed into a very terrible undead creature, at least a legendary challenge-level monster. Then, a town was destroyed because of this. As the favored one of the misfortune goddess, Soren did not have the slightest affection for this goddess. Because she was an extremely willful existence, any action that angered her could lead to a curse. Even Soren, like the other gods, had a trace of vigilance and fear towards her. Because luck was the easiest thing to cheat people. The appearance of the misfortune goddess meant that the War of the Twins would also begin. Soren was a little worried because he did not want to be involved in the battle between the misfortune goddess and the goddess of fortune. No matter who won in the end, it was not necessarily a good thing for him. Soren decided to wait and see, as long as it didn't affect the things he cared about. Moreover, he also had something very important to do recently. That was to conduct the second large-scale test of the battle banner plane and attempt to create demon hunters in his god kingdom. The former was already in preparation. It was estimated that in at most half a month, the city of Mordor would be able to carry out a large-scale battle flag trial. This time, Soren needed to test whether his modified device would still cause deaths. As for the second one, it was the most important one. The demon hunters were a very important part of Soren's future plans. They would be the vanguard of the attack on the Dread Lord's kingdom, completely eliminating the Dread Lord's important fighting force, and the main force of the war against other gods in the future. Creating a demon hunter was not easy. This required Soren's divine power and the bloodline seed of his demon incarnation. What Soren wanted now was a way to mass-produce them. Assimilate them into the reincarnation pool in his god kingdom, and then create a separate reincarnation pool so that all the souls that could be promoted to become demon hunters could be directly transformed. Demon hunters were born with strength close to the higher grade. If enough demon hunters could be cultivated, then they would make up for the lack of combat power of the god kingdom, and also make up for the lack of flexibility of the golem army in terms of intelligence. A suitable clergy for Vivian had not been found. She was originally the Witch of Fear, and the most suitable clergy for her was undoubtedly Fear. However, it was not easy to find a suitable springboard. Although there were gods that had fallen, it had not much to do with Vivian. Soren also did not dare to casually start a war with other gods. At present, the gods that did not have a god behind them were basically hiding. Therefore, the best situation was to let Vivian directly obtain the clergy of Fear. This meant that she could quickly become a medium divine power, and after completely integrating with the power of the Dread Lord, Vivian could easily become a great divine power. If there were two great divine powers in a god system, then they were qualified to carve out a territory in the pantheon. Soren must use the great divine power as a standard. At present, among the people he could recruit, Saruman was at most a low divine power. The possibility of the Maiden of Pain being promoted was very low. The Princess Royal of Arendelle was at least a medium divine power, but it was hard to say whether she would be willing to join his god system instead of cultivating others. For Soren, it was better to let Vivian, who he could fully trust, obtain the clergy of Fear as soon as possible. The integration of the god kingdom was in progress. The demon incarnation had controlled nearly 1/5 of the land of the Forgotten Land. The golem army of Mordor was taking shape. Elemental fission was being studied. After it was completed, Mordor could carry out the final transformation plan of the floating city. The energy supply would greatly expand the number of the golem army. For Soren, everything he had accumulated was about to explode. At that time, he would descend the god kingdom into the bottomless abyss, and then attack the god kingdom of the Dread Lord. Destroy the throne of Fear. The throne of Fear must be destroyed before the god of murder broke the seal, so that Vivian could smoothly take over the clergy of Fear. Attacking a god's kingdom was a very vast war, and for this, it required an urgent need for a considerable amount of power. Soren had been holding back until now, neither expanding his territory in the material plane, nor developing faith in the areas of other gods, in order to reduce the hostility of others, so that there would be no worries when attacking the god kingdom of the Dread Lord. To put it bluntly, with the current strength of Mordor, with the power that Soren had accumulated for so long, he could control all the coastlines in the south within a day, capture the Principality of Rossard within 3 days, and then expand north to the Deepwater port near the Tower of the Northern Witches within 7 days, control half of the land on the south coast within half a month, and directly attack the vicinity of Amber City and Whiterun within a month. A huge naval force. A powerful army corps. An airship combat unit that transcended eras. Note: secret armed forces. A flying dragon legion that had been formed. A floating space tower that could attack with high-altitude energy. And a golem legion that could be teleported to any place on the south coast at any time. If Soren wanted to expand, he could instantly expand Mordor into the largest kingdom in the south. But he didn't do that. Because for him, Vivian was more important than these. He continued to use all his power to destroy the Throne of Fear, not to expand his territory. He didn't want to face the gods head-on yet. The power of Mordor had always been reserved, but when Soren really made a move, it would inevitably be like thunder. P.S. Let me explain, The Undefeated Legend is a client-side game. It is different from traditional online games. There is no experience mode. You can level up by killing a boss. After playing for a while, you can directly fight in groups. It is also easier for students and office workers to play. When killing the boss, you can get physical prizes such as Durex. When logging in, you can also get phone fees and Chidian coins. If you are tired of reading, you can come in and play with me. Chapter 938. A sharp alarm sounded. With the sound of the horn, the garrison of Mordor City quickly gathered near the barracks. Then there was the low roar of the wyverns in the distant sky. 5 wyverns flew directly to the southwest, and the army quickly moved there. Is there a war? In the central square of Mordor City, the citizens looked at each other in surprise. One of the young men said, "What's going on? Why did the army suddenly gather?" Even the wyvern knights were mobilized. At this moment, the ground suddenly shook. Earthquake? Spread out. Is there an earthquake? A panicked figure came, but it only lasted for a short time, but it also brought a hint of chaos to the crowd. Library. A group of witches quickly walked out of the building. One of the beautiful witches with glasses raised her eyebrows and said, "No. This is not an earthquake. Someone had used the earthquake spell. There's a battle in Mordor City." A real earthquake had a large area of effect. It would not end so quickly. The shaking of the ground just now was obviously the result of magic. There was a very powerful existence that used earthquake on the island of Mordor. Could it be related to the recent elemental riots? The one who spoke was a mature witch with full breasts. She looked up into the distance and said, "If there's a battle, maybe we should go and take a look." According to the rules of Mordor City, military achievements can also be used to exchange for contribution points. Mordor City rarely sent witches to the battlefield. Because for Soren, they were closer to researchers. Even if the witches had strong combat power, what Mordor City needed the most was the results of their research, not the weak witches. Mordor City now needed a large number of high-end technical personnel, and it was very difficult to train them. Even if ordinary citizens were trained, they could only be qualified for assembly line work. The real core power was these more knowledgeable spellcasters. At present, there were 2 spellcaster factions in Mordor City. One was the witch class led by Gloria, and the other was the alchemist class led by Saruman. Saruman also began to form his own team, mainly attracting other wizards from Shipwreck Bay and Deepwater Port. Their overall strength was not as good as the witch group, but they were good at alchemy. The mobilization of the army became more and more frequent. The system of Mordor City was absolute, and the order was carried out very quickly. Immediately, the 3rd and 6th Corps were assembled and began to move towards the southwest. Meanwhile, on the other side of Mordor City, near the quagmire that was once sealed by Soren, the high slope near the valley had been occupied by a large group of earth elementals. Of course, Soren's seal did not open. Even if it was reactivated, it would not be so fast. His divine power could last for at least 1 or 2 months. These earth elementals came out from another crack. They occupied the high slope overnight, and at the same time, they expanded around, treating all creatures as enemies, and attacked the army of Mordor City. Rumble. Crush these humans. The language used by the earth elemental was a kind of low vibrato, a bit like the sound of the earth shaking. The existence that caused trouble for Mordor City was naturally not an ordinary earth elemental. This time, an earth elemental lord appeared in the crack. It was an earth giant made of rocks more than 10 meters high. It invaded the material plane. And it also brought the army of the earth elemental plane, a large group of earth elementals, earth monsters, and half-elemental earth elementals. This attack quickly alarmed Soren, but when he arrived, the battle had already begun. The reaction of Mordor City was very fast. The golem puppets were sent to the battlefield immediately, and then the deacon of the Shadow Church also arrived quickly. There were thousands of earth elementals. This time, Soren did not mean to make a move. He just focused on the earth giant in the lead. The army of Mordor City must be sharpened, because this kind of attack would become more and more frequent. This was not the first time Mordor City fought with elementals. As early as 3 days ago, the fleet of Mordor City eliminated a group of berserk water elementals. It was just that this time the scale was obviously larger. The main reason was that there was an earth elemental lord. The earth giant, which was more than 10 meters high, was obviously a divine life form. However, Soren still did not make a move. At his current level of strength, the benefits of killing a divine life form were just so. Soren still had a large amount of slaughter EXP that had not been used. These slaughter EXP were enough for him to level up several times. The reason why he did not level up was to deal with the greater divine power. Because Soren's current divine power was really not enough. Using slaughter EXP to level up would only increase his attributes by 1 or 2 points. Most of the abilities he had now were almost maxed out. Soren's slaughter EXP was to convert it into divine power. If he needed to fight with a greater divine power as a last resort, the divine power he currently had was absolutely not enough. At that time, he would need slaughter EXP. If Soren converted all the slaughter EXP he had stored, he could instantly restore hundreds or thousands of divine power points, enough for a second burst of divine power. Mortals had a bottleneck. That was a problem that high-grade legends had to face. After a legendary rogue leveled up to a certain level, the only increase in strength was the mastery of shadows. Soren had the shadow priesthood, so leveling up his rogue profession to the maximum level would only increase his attributes. It was impossible for a level 40 rogue to defeat a god who held the title of rogue. The wizard profession level began to reach a bottleneck after reaching the legendary level because at this time, they could only deepen their understanding of spells and increase their own spell slots. No matter how high they leveled up, as long as the goddess of magic did not open up a higher level of the magic net, even a level 40 wizard could only cast legendary spells. This was the limitation of mortals. For Soren, who had become a god, as long as he had enough divine power points, he could cast countless spells. As long as he had enough divine power points, he could always keep the divine shield on. 1 or 2 points of strength could not change much. This was also the important reason why, in the long history, there were so many epic characters with professions as high as level 30, but in the end, there were only a few who could kill gods and become gods. When necessary, Soren could level up his profession level at any time. If he encountered an enemy with great divine power, Soren could also convert slaughter EXP into divine power points. In fact, after Soren was promoted to a mid-grade divine power, slaughter EXP had begun to be converted into special divine power reserves. This time, it was Vivian who made the move. And her enemy was the earth giant in front of him. Soren had to test Vivian's combat power after becoming a demigod. This was the best time to practice skills because if Vivian inherited the priesthood of fear in the future, it would be difficult for her to experience the current state of mind. However, contrary to Soren's plan, there were 2 Vivian facing the earth giant at the moment. One was the main body. The other was the simulacrum. The little girl's talent in this spell was simply unbelievable. Even Soren could not compare to her because the one in charge of controlling the simulacrum was the Witch of Fear, Lillian. P.S. Invincible Legend will start testing at 13:00 tomorrow. The Buddha army has been assembled and is ready to charge for 10 million Chidin coins. Open Sky District, Kingdom of Chi. Do you dare to build a family with me, fight for the king, and conquer the world? What's the saying? There's no time to explain, get in the car. Chapter 939. Mimicry was a very useful spell. Vivian had been studying and adapting to her identity as a demigod, and mimicry was the spell she had been studying the most. Because of the unique nature of their souls, even Soren couldn't separate them. Note, this idea only came to him for a while. Therefore, if the two souls wanted to live together in harmony, they had to come up with a suitable plan. In the past, they would appear separately for a period of time. Lillian was Vivian's companion soul, and when necessary, she would take over Vivian's body. But now, the two souls were complete, and Soren even suspected that the death of one of them or the forceful separation would cause serious consequences. Therefore, the safest plan now was to let them adapt to the current situation. At this time, mimicry's effect would be reflected. It was a spell that could create an independent avatar, and it was very compatible with Vivian and Lillian's companion souls. On the battlefield, Vivian and Lillian surrounded the stone giant from both sides. Mastering a spell didn't require such a long time, but cultivating the ability to use this spell in battle required a lot of energy. At this moment, Vivian was a completely different person. One of them was her original body, which had the strength of a high-grade legend. Her main profession was a divine sorcerer, and her other profession was a high-grade wizard. The other was her clone, which retained about 80% of her original strength, including her frightening spell slots. For Vivian, mimicry was equivalent to turning one turret into two turrets. Hence, throughout the entire battle, the stone giant could be seen being bombarded by spells that covered the sky and covered the earth. Sigh. This little girl. Soren silently watched the battle, and after a while, he couldn't help but smile and shake his head. It was very difficult for a 10-year-old girl to master high-end combat skills, but fortunately, she knew her own advantages and accidentally came up with a way to defeat 10 with brute force. The battle didn't last long. Under Vivian's overwhelming spell attacks, the stone giant only lasted for less than 5 minutes before it died. With the death of the stone giant, a golden light of divinity appeared, and Soren couldn't help but focus on observing it. This was his main focus this time. He needed to know if Vivian's bloodline had the ability to fuse with divinity. A little bit of divinity merged into Vivian's body. When he saw the divinity of the stone giant being absorbed by Vivian, Soren's expression became serious. He was right. As the descendant of the 3 death gods, Vivian also had the innate ability to absorb divinity, but this ability was inferior to Soren. If Soren participated in the battle, the divinity would almost certainly be absorbed by him. But now, Vivian had single-handedly killed the stone giant, so she had fused with the stone giant's divinity. This was good news. This meant that it would be much easier for Vivian to inherit the power of the divinity of fear. Brother. Brother. After killing the stone giant, the two Vivian excitedly came in front of Soren, raised their little heads and happily said, "I'm awesome, right?" They were exactly the same. During the battle, the two Vivian changed their positions many times. Now that Soren looked at them, he couldn't tell which one was the simulacrum. But he could more or less tell the difference. Vivian's aura was softer, while Lillian's aura was a little more flamboyant. As for other things, there was no way to tell. Yes. Soren reached out and touched the two little girls' heads, smiled and said, "You did well." Lillian's soul was born with Vivian, so Soren accepted the fact that he had a sister very quickly. Because Vivian knew everything that Vivian knew, and Lillian also experienced everything that Vivian experienced. Soren thought for a while and said seriously, "You two go back first. Just now, the stone giant's divinity has been integrated into your bodies. I need you to convert and absorb this divinity as soon as possible." Tell me immediately when you're done. I need to know the speed of your integration. The day of the attack on the Kingdom of Fear was getting closer and closer. Soren had to get rid of this threat, but he needed to know the speed of the two little girls' integration of divinity because he might need Vivian's power in the final stage of the Avatar crisis. Even to some extent, when the Avatar crisis ended, how much success could Soren achieve in the end? Vivian would be the most important point. Because Vivian had many things that no one could replace. She was the most important person to Soren. She had complete trust in Soren. She could let Soren completely trust her. She could have the potential of a great divine power. In this regard, Vivian far exceeded Gloria and Fallen Witch. She even had more potential than Princess Royal. I see. Vivian nodded obediently. She had always wanted to help her brother, and as a smart little girl, she also realized that the whole world was changing. She hoped that she could help her brother. But this required a lot of power. Because Soren was a mid-level divine power, and his enemies were bound to be more powerful. It was because of this that the little girl could patiently train her strength. Otherwise, with the lawless character of Lillian, the Witch of Fear, she would have already gone out to wander around. The reason why Lillian could patiently contact the simulacrum and cooperate with Vivian to integrate divinity and control the power of the divine spark was that she hoped that she could also help Soren at a critical moment. On the other side. After the battle, the army of Mordor was cleaning up the battlefield. The earth elementals dropped a lot of good things. These crystals could be used as materials for the witches to make golem puppets, and the body of the earth elementals itself was a resource. They could be used to quickly make parts of golem puppets. Soren's task was to seal the cracks in the plane. During the time of the elemental turmoil, all he could do was to mend it because no one dared to counterattack the elemental plane. Even the abyss had been beaten by the army of the elemental plane. Facing the endless elemental legion, even a divine system would have a headache. Change space, divine spark power. Soren transformed into the form of the saint. With the golden light, the cracks in the plane in front of him were also sealed. The next things could be left to others. Soren was ready to return to Mordor to officially start the expansion plan of the Demon Hunter. He had extracted some genes from the demon avatar, and the fusion of the pool of reincarnation was continuing. If successful, he would first try to transform a blood pool in the abyss. The blood pool was the pool of reincarnation. However, the power of the blood pool was a little different from the pool of reincarnation. It only transformed the lowest level of abyss worms. That's right. Vivian recently had a new name, Twin of Fear. P.S. First update. Chapter 940. The cold wind was howling. Even in summer, the cold wind in Icewind Valley was still as sharp as a knife. A thin figure wearing a cloak appeared. He advanced along the Icewind Valley. When he heard a strange sound from the side, he stopped and pressed his white hand on the hilt of his saber. Come out. A clear voice sounded. The lone traveler made people realize that she was a woman as soon as she spoke. In this turbulent period, even a team of adventurers did not dare to wander at will, and a lone woman was very rare. She could walk to Icewind Valley alive, which undoubtedly proved that she had the ability to protect herself in this chaotic era. Haha. There was a strange sound. Following which, 3 ice trolls rushed out from the corner. The ice troll in the lead had a huge physique, standing over 3 meters tall. The other 2 were much shorter. One of them was holding a stick-like weapon. Upon closer inspection, it was a human leg bone that had been eaten clean. Human flesh. Delicious. Eat meat. The ice troll made a strange sound and rushed toward the lone woman in front of it excitedly. Shang. Accompanied by a cold light, the cloaked woman disappeared in an instant. The next moment, she appeared at the side of the ice troll. Magical radiance swirled around her scimitar and cut open the ice troll's neck, leaving a wound 7 to 8 centimeters deep. If it were not for the lack of strength as a woman, she would have cut off the ice troll's head directly. Sword form, spinning strike. Accompanied by the wind and snow of Icewind Valley, a thin figure soared into the air. Her fluttering cloak revealed her fiery red long hair. She flipped her palm and another curved blade appeared. It was different from the one she used at the beginning. This second curved blade carried a threatening, baleful aura. The moment it hit the ice troll, it was directly cut in half. The first attack couldn't even cut off the ice troll's head. But the second attack cut the ice troll in half. There was no doubt that the power of this second weapon was very amazing. Plop! The battle only lasted for 3 seconds. When the bodies of the 3 ice trolls fell, the slender woman also landed gently. Icing death. She took off the hood on her head and reached out to touch the scimitar in front of her. She murmured, as expected of the weapon used by my master. Adele Isabella. After the red-haired female pirate in Motor City completed the task of controlling the Wind Spear Hills, she asked Soren to give her a chance to travel alone, hoping to break through the legendary realm. She had already lost count of how many battles she had fought during her travels. Ever since she left the Wind Spear Hills, she had encountered countless battles along the way. There were lizard men, gnolls, ogres, bandits, ill-intentioned adventurers, crazy degenerates, and even the hungry bugbears that attacked her. Along the way, Adele Isabella saw too many cruel scenes. She saw the piles of bones on the roadside, the starving people bartering for food, the fallen people sacrificing living people, and the poor farmers who had been cooked in the lizardman's pot. The waves of impact of the Avatar crisis had turned the material plane into a man-eating hell. And it was precisely because she had seen all this that Adele Isabella discovered the greatness of Motor City and the greatness of Soren. Compared with all the hellish things outside, the stability and prosperity of Mordor City was like heaven. Her faith became extremely firm. Because she firmly believed that in this terrible era, only Soren could save everything, bring a stable and orderly life to mortals, and end this terrible era. Along the Icewind Valley, Adele Isabella soon saw the bones of a horse that had been eaten clean, and there were several human remains next to it. There was no doubt that this was the work of the ice trolls. The victims should be a small caravan. Facing the trolls that were extremely difficult to kill, they were not spared in the end. Sigh. Adele Isabella sighed and continued to move forward. She had seen too many similar things along the way. She had traveled all the way from the south to the north, and everything she saw was so shocking. Mortals were like ants struggling at death's door, and many once rich towns had become a tomb of the living dead. That was the work of the undead. The resentment before death had caused ghouls to appear in many places, especially those who had starved to death. It was very likely that they would mutate. Along the way, Adele Isabella had also encountered many dangers. If it weren't for the icing death that Soren had left for her, she might not have been able to come all the way here. Breaking through to the realm of legends was right in front of her. But Adele Isabella always felt that there was a bottleneck stuck at the most critical point, making it impossible for her to truly enter the realm of legends. She was ready to go to the Frost Kingdom. In the cold wind and snow, she sharpened her will in order to break through to the realm of legends as soon as possible. Because she felt a calling, she felt that Motor City would need her strength. Snake Island. A bare-chested figure stood in front of a reef by the shore. With the ebb and flow of the tide, waves crashed against his body. He expressionlessly waved his sharp blade, and no one knew how long he had been doing this. This was a burly man. There was a very conspicuous sign on his body, that was, he had only one eye. One-eyed dragon. Another huge wave came head-on. One-eyed dragon roared and slashed down with his sword in an instant. With a threatening cold light, the huge wave in front of him was split in the middle by his sword. Ha! One-eyed dragon slowly put away his sword and stood there. After a moment of contemplation, he murmured, "Why can't I break through?" Since the giant broke through to the realm of legends, all the pirate leaders felt a deep sense of crisis. Adele Isabella gave up the power of the Wind Spear Hills and decided to travel to the mainland to find an opportunity to break through to the realm of legends. Scarface followed the fleet to the Eastern Kingdom to learn new abilities. As a pirate leader who stayed on the south coast, One-Eyed Dragon got inspiration after meeting an Eastern Ronin. He began to learn their fighting skills and tried to understand the power of Chi. Snake Island had become his current stronghold. The reason why he chose this place was only because the waves here were more violent and more suitable for him to train. But breaking through to the realm of legends was not as easy as he thought. He clearly felt that he was just one step away, but he could not cross it. One-Eyed Dragon felt that he needed an opportunity, a life and death experience. Because the last time he directly broke through the realm, it was at the moment when he was hovering between life and death. He didn't know if Adele Isabella had broken through to the realm of legends, but he knew that there was a rising star called Ugly Monkey, who had already entered the realm of legends. He felt a deep sense of crisis. If he wanted to keep his current position and get more power in the camp of Mordor City, he must be promoted to the realm of legends. P.S. I'm finally done, so tired. Today, 7/22, Undefeated Legend officially opens beta testing. I'm busy and have a look at the game. I don't know how the Buddha army is preparing. Is there still a chance to be the king? Chapter 941. No one could stop the growth of Mordor City. As time went by, the first batch of legendary professions in Mordor City gradually appeared, making up for the disadvantage left by the lack of time. Maybe it was because Soren had the power of slaughter. The followers who believed in and served him seemed to advance more easily than others. Take the three newcomers who had reached the legendary realm in Mordor City. The first one was Giant. He was a warrior who was not very smart, but he was very loyal to Soren and was a fanatical believer of the Shadow Lord. Giant was the first warrior to reach the legendary realm in Mordor City. Then the second person was a rogue named Ugly Monkey. He was a very talented rogue and was also a fanatical believer of Soren. This talented young man had broken through several times between life and death. He suddenly surpassed other pirate leaders and became the second person to reach the legendary realm in Mordor City in 2 years. Then the third person to break through was Milan. Half-elf, Milan. Saint Priest, Milan. As a girl who believed in and served Soren, she had a natural advantage and her strength improved very quickly. Almost shortly after Ugly Monkey advanced to the legendary realm, Saint Priest, Milan also advanced to the legendary realm and became the leader of the church, second only to the high priest. It seemed that the believers who had something to do with Soren improved faster than others. And those pirate leaders who followed Soren, at least, especially those who did not believe in Soren, seemed to have stayed in the range of high-grade professions and could not get the opportunity to break through. The light of dawn shone. It was a very peaceful day, but something happened in the peace. When Soren was transforming the battle flag plane, he suddenly sensed a sense of joy from a distance, followed by spiritual communication and devout prayer. Almost without thinking, Soren knew that Adele Isabella, who had been traveling on the continent, had broken through the legendary realm. As a fanatic follower of Soren, the red-haired female pirate was bound to become a Holy Spirit apostle in Soren's holy kingdom in the future. In order to ensure the safety of this Holy Spirit, Soren gave her icing death. And today, Adele Isabella had returned the favor to Soren. She had successfully become a legendary during this trip, which meant that she had the qualifications to become a God's messenger in Soren's divine kingdom. This was a very important matter. As a new god, although he had many followers, there were very few who were qualified to become a god's emissary. For now, among Soren's subordinates, there were only 3 who were qualified to become messengers of God. One was the Saint Priestess, Milan, the other was the fanatic, Ugly Monkey, and the last was the red-haired pirate, Adele Isabella. However, this was still far from enough. Because in order to maintain the normal operation of the divine kingdom, Soren, as a intermediate divine power, needed at least 4 to 6 messengers of God's divine kingdom. There were many legendary professions in the material plane, but there were not many who could serve Soren devoutly. With his current situation, it was not easy for him to cultivate so many. Many times, the resources controlled by the gods were accumulated little by little over time, and the Holy Spirit also needed enough time to cultivate. The bottomless abyss, the third layer. After occupying the land in the south of the Forgotten Land, the Golumba arena doubled in size. Sauron was a generous lord. He divided part of the land to the high-grade demons under his command, but as the demon lord who ruled this land, he still firmly held the control of the Abyss Blood Pool. At present, there were 2 Abyss Blood Pools in Sauron's territory. They were constantly providing Sauron with people and troops. Overlooking the Golumba arena from a high altitude, one could already see the layout of the city. The center was the most magnificent arena, the side was the business district operated by demons, the south was a large-scale blacksmith shop, and the north was a large military camp. Further away was the location of the volcano, where minerals were constantly being mined. Inside the magnificent palace, Sauron sat on the throne overlooking everything. Beside him was a group of charming succubus maids. After completing the deal with the Radiance Nun, Sauron had a group of succubus under his command. They were a little smarter than other demons and could do a lot of work. Great Sauron. At this moment, standing in front of Sauron was an old Yugoloth, and on the other side was an ugly Anababa. The Yugoloth bowed to Sauron and said, "We have sent the metal you want. Recently, there has been a bit of chaos in the Styx. It seems that the Knoll King, Yeenagu, defeated someone and fled to this plane, so the next batch of goods you need may be a few days late." Sauron frowned when he heard this. After thinking for a moment, he waved his hand and said, "Got it. But you have to send it as soon as possible." Yugros heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing this and quickly took his leave. At this time, the ugly Anababa came up and said in a hoarse voice, "Lord Sauron, a lord of the Shura realm needs a large number of abyssal worms. He is willing to use a batch of gems as payment. I wonder if you are interested?" The Anababa liked to do cross-plane trade, and the abyssal worm trade had always been the focus. Sauron pondered for a moment and said, "I'm not interested in gems. But if it can be exchanged for metal ingots, I can consider it." The Anababa also left when she heard this. He needed to discuss with the Shura realm lord and then decide whether to trade. Because of Sauron's inclination towards order, the Golumba arena had become one of the main trading markets in the upper 3 floors of the abyss. Not only the Shura realm demons, but even the lords of the Scorched Hell and the Grey Wilderness also liked to send people to purchase materials here. Any trade in the abyss was profitable. If there was no more than double the profit, the demons would not be willing to trade at all, so Sauron also made a lot of money. But most of the things he harvested were exchanged for ores and then secretly sent to Motor City. After staying in the hall for a while, Sauron came to the secret barracks of the Golumba arena. This was a very vast underground training ground. There were almost no demons here, and 2 demon hunters were in charge of guarding the door. "My lord! My lord!" As soon as Sauron entered, the newborn demon hunters who were training inside knelt down on one knee. Sauron waved his hand and said, "No need to be so polite. How many demon hunters are reincarnated now?" A demon hunter with dark green scars came out and said, "My lord. There are currently 127 reincarnated demon hunters. 12 of them need to adapt to their new bodies. Heroic spirit transformation. These newborn demon hunters were not transformed with other souls, but directly transformed from Sorin's kingdom." Chapter 942. What was to come had finally come. While Sorin was busy in Mordor City, tens of thousands of orcs had gathered near the Agate River. Of course. This time, the gathering of orcs was not for war. With the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, many lands in the entire material plane had become barren. Because of Sorin's intervention, the current casualties in the material plane were about 10%, which meant that almost 1/10 of the population had died. The orcs were one of the unluckier ones. Because of the battlefield of Autumn Fall, the orcs had lost about 50% of their population in the Avatar crisis. But fortunately, the orcs were very fertile. Basically, as long as peace was restored, it was enough to double the population in 10 years. As a mixed-race creature, the status of the orcs had always been very awkward. Humans did not like them, and the pure-blood orcs did not like them. They had always been wandering outside the two races. It could be said that there was a big gap between them and the half-elves. And the biggest gap was that the difference in appearance was too big. Because of the gap in appearance, the orcs had always been unable to integrate into other races. The final battle of Autumnfall was once ridiculed by female adventurers as the battle of appearance of the mixed race. The densely packed orcs gathered together. In the center of the orc camp, there was a magnificent altar with a diameter of more than 100 meters. More than 10 old shaman priests gathered near the altar. Their faces were a little excited as they directed the nearby half-orcs to get busy. At the most important part of the altar, a lifelike statue had been erected. On top of the statue was Eugene with an aged face. He held a spear in his hand and looked into the distance. His body was covered with tattoos made of ashes. The bonfire was jumping. Night was coming. A large number of orcs gathered around the altar, and the shaman priests became the hosts of the ceremony. Boom! As if they had received a command, at about 9:00 in the middle of the night, all the orcs suddenly knelt down, and then a low prayer came from the center of the altar. My Lord Eugene. Note, orc language. You are the master of the orcs. You are the protector of the orcs. You guide us forward. You teach us to farm. You strengthen our race. You are our eternal guide. My Lord Eugene. You raise the kingdom of God. Rise to the sky. The muffled sound of prayers echoed across the wilderness. As tens of thousands of people's prayers gathered together, a little divine brilliance began to gather on the statue in the center of the altar. The investiture. Eugene endured for so long and finally decided to become a god at this moment. Eugene, the Ascender. This old orc who was about to reach the end of his life. Because of this, he had finally succeeded in becoming a god. It was different from Sauron's investiture ceremony. Eugene's investiture prayer was very short. It was almost a regular half-orc clergy. The time he chose was around 9:00 at night, which meant that he was one of the gods in the evil camp. Under normal circumstances, the gods of the good alignment would be apotheosized during the day. Similarly, unless they were very powerful, the apotheosis ceremony would usually be held before dawn. In terms of scale, Eugene's investiture ceremony was undoubtedly bigger than Soren's. However, judging from the divine brilliance on the altar, Eugene's investiture ceremony was only about half of Soren's. Due to the limitations of their race, the level of civilization of the orcs was not high. Therefore, Eugene chose the wild mode investiture ceremony. The so-called wild mode was just a joke. It meant that the level of civilization of the investiture race was so low that there was no way to popularize temples. What should they do? In this case, they could only use an altar to make up the numbers. The so-called altar was often a platform and a few large stones. It was very convenient for the investiture ceremony, but at the same time, it also reduced the proportion of the power of faith absorbed. Of course, using altars also had its benefits. For example, what happened in front of them? After the first prayer, a group of orcs dragged a few ground dragons to the altar. Blood sacrifice. This was the oldest sacrificial ceremony. As the shaman personally ended the lives of these ground dragons, the blood flowed along the runes on the altar. Then the light condensed on the statue skyrocketed, and at the same time, there was a faint bloody light. 1,000 miles away. Motor City. Soren appeared outside the door in an instant. He looked up at the sky, and then cast a simulacrum. Greater teleportation. Soren's figure appeared over the city of Autumnfall, and then quickly came near the Agate River. He saw tens of thousands of orcs gathered, and at the same time, he realized that Eugene was holding an investiture ceremony. Finally, it's investiture. Soren shook his head and sighed. Then his figure appeared, and a little bit of golden divine brilliance appeared. Compared with his investiture ceremony, Eugene's investiture ceremony was a bit lonely because no other gods came to congratulate him from beginning to end. The only one who appeared in the sky was Soren, his former enemy, but now he was temporarily cooperating with him. Soren's existence could only be seen by Eugene, and the orcs could not see him. Other than that, neither the gods of the human god system nor the gods of the orc god system appeared. The blood sacrifice was in progress. When Soren saw the blood sacrifice ceremony, he knew the path Eugene had chosen. This was the ancient shaman doctrine. As a half-orc, Eugene did not choose the way of preaching because it was difficult for the orcs to establish enough civilization like humans. This ancient blood sacrifice could quickly increase Eugene's power, but it would also create a bottleneck for him because of the blood sacrifice. Soren had always rejected the blood sacrifice from beginning to end. Even all the rituals in the temple did not include blood sacrifice. For him, this kind of impure power was not beneficial at all. However, Eugene had divinity stolen from the lesser demon lord, so it was not surprising that he chose the blood sacrifice. A little bit of golden brilliance appeared. Eugene was not able to create a holy kingdom in such a short period of time, but the orcs also had their own ancestral land, which was a kingdom formed by ancestor worship. What the Ascendant needed to do now was to inherit all of this. The whole investiture ceremony lasted for about an hour and a half, and the blood sacrifice ceremony took up 2/3 of the time. After Eugene completed the investiture ceremony, he nodded slightly at Soren, who was watching all of this from the sky. Soren nodded in response and turned around and disappeared. They were both officially gods, but Eugene's influence on the material plane was far less than Soren's. Basically, he did not disturb any gods, and not many gods paid more attention to him. Even the vampire god's investiture ceremony was a little bigger than his. This was the limitation. Eugene was only a half-orc, and both Soren and Reinhardt were the successors of the 3 gods of death. P.S. Guess who will be the next to become a god? Chapter 943. Mordor City. Barracks. Today's Mordor City was a little different because hundreds of people were gathered in the courtyard at the side door of the city hall early in the morning. Most of these people were elite warriors, and some were even officers of Mordor City. In the absence of blocking the news, a piece of news was spreading among the officers of Mordor City. That was, the higher-ups of Mordor City had a unique trial method in their hands. It could allow people to enter it and hone their combat skills. Even if they died in it, they would not really die. It was said that those who had entered it had improved a lot after coming out. Some had even touched the edge of the legendary realm, which made many high-grade professions feel excited. Among these people, there was one person who was very special. He stood alone on one side of the courtyard, and there was a group of people gathered around him. He seemed to be in the center of power of Mordor City, but also seemed to be wandering outside the power of Mordor City. This person was the One-Eyed Dragon. He was one of the first pirate leaders to follow Soren in Mordor City, and he was the manager of the sea from Port Tylon to Snake Island. It was a complete accident that he joined this trial because after he couldn't break through the legendary realm for a long time, the One-Eyed Dragon learned about this trial from the news channel of Mordor City. Then, the pirate leader, who had been famous for a long time, directly begged Soren to join the trial. After all, the One-Eyed Dragon was one of the first followers, so Soren agreed after thinking about it. During this time, Soren had been transforming the battle flag plane. As a god, Soren's progress was very fast. Now his attributes had changed, especially in the basic skills, which were even more obvious. His ability had improved the most at present. Name, Soren, Holy Form, Intermediate Divine Power. Race, Half-Elf, God of Massacre. Attributes, Strength 23, +6, Agility 39, +6, Constitution 28, +6, Intelligence 30, +7, Wisdom 21, +6, Charm 25, +9. Alignment, Lawful Evil Class, Level 10 Rogue, 01150000, Level 10 Shadow Dancer, Max, Level 10 Wizard, 02725000, Level 12 Arcanist, 03255000, Grade 7, Health Points, 625625, Robust, EXP, 52555075 Slaughter EXP, 15,545 Profession EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none attribute points, none legendary point, 300 divinity, 295, middle divinity. Upgrading, great divinity, requires 300 points. Godhood, 165, mid-grade godhood, requires 300 points to upgrade, great divinity. Divine power, 513300. Upgrading to greater divine power requires 1200 divine power points and mastery of deities descending, divine law. The current divinity storage limit is 3,300 points. Clergy, shadow, thief, half-elf, rogue, tracker. Domains, disease, poison, trickery, slaughter, death, fear, evil, domination, piracy, shadow, plants. Spirit chi, evil spirit chi, fear spirit chi. Status, normal. Basic skills, sneak 555, literacy 435, steal 425, pick lock 375, snare 315, focus 375, negotiate 515, appraise 325, deceive 375, intimidation 575, taunt 315, perform 315, listen 425, dodge 455, parry 315, block 275, heal 275, search 435, detect 515, scroll copy 285, spell identify 315, survival 355, use magic equipment 275, cooking 225, alchemy 475, forge magic weapon 315. Saint form, transcendence, spell immunity 1 to 4, epic divine power, instant cast 1 to 3. Godhood abilities, space change, death's hand, reality change, form change, divine power shockwave, language proficiency, character proficiency, interplanar communication, astral teleportation, plane teleportation. Legendary skills, legendary mana construct, legendary tenacity, legendary spell penetration, legendary reflex, sea weakness, perfect dual wielding, omnipotent hands, legendary evasion, legendary battle skills, epic dexterity, epic intelligence, epic constitution. Special abilities, blessing of the goddess of magic, god slayer, blessing of the misfortune goddess, blessing of the sea goddess, dragon blood baptism LV2, heart of slaughter, slayer, death walker, ascetic, erudite, blasphemy. Personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance, encyclopedic knowledge, skilled spellcasting, reflex evasion, intuitive evasion, roll evasion, agile movement, evade sight, dark vision, combat spellcasting, mobile spellcasting, spell control, empower spell, maximize spell, craft magic equipment, spell penetration, minor magic resistance, minor cold resistance, moderate fire resistance, minor poison resistance, minor electric resistance, robust, high regeneration, telepathy 100. Feat. Profession abilities, arcane memory, arcane counterspell, arcane runes, shadow dominator, nimble mind, military weapon, proficiency, curved sword, legendary. Combat skills, summon shadow, shadow leap, 300 meters, shadow strike, shadow jump, 2 times, vampiric touch, divinity, sword form, heavy slash, sword form, horizontal slash, sword form, beheading, sword form, waist slash, sword form, spinning strike, spinning slash. In order to complete the transformation plan of the War Flag realm, Soren increased his Arcanist level by 2 levels. He also added all his skill points to alchemy, which increased his alchemy to 475 points. At the same time, he also obtained the ability, Legendary Magic Construct, to cooperate with the transformation plan. This ability was similar to Princess Royal's magic transformation, where he could change the form and effect of his spells according to his will. The application in battle was similar to Princess Royal's Snow Incarnation, but Soren mainly focused on alchemy. When one's strength reached Soren's level, it would be very difficult to increase his level. He now had more than 5 million Slaughter EXP in his storage. It seemed like a lot, but it was not enough. At most, he could only increase his level by 2 levels. For now. Killing ordinary enemies was not very meaningful to Soren. He now needed at least legendary enemies to be worth killing. So if he wanted to continue increasing his profession level, Soren's target was still the Dread Lord. According to an adventure log in his previous life, when the god of massacre, Baal, completed the quest to destroy the throne of massacre, the son of massacre at that time received an astonishing 30 million slaughter experience points. If the son of massacre did not give up on becoming a god, perhaps a new powerful evil god would have been born. Soren was now waiting for a big move. He did not expect to receive 30 million slaughter EXP after destroying the throne of terror, but it should not be a small amount, right? After all, the Dread Lord was also a greater god. Moreover, the god of massacre, Baal, and the Dread Lord were in a very similar situation. They were both in a situation where they were on the brink of death, and the core of their soul and power was stored in the throne of massacre, throne of terror. Soren now hoped to obtain the soul energy in it. For Soren, if he could obtain 30 million slaughter EXP, then he should have no problem leveling up 10 times in a row. In terms of profession level, he should be able to challenge a greater god. After a long wait, these people finally entered the Warflag realm through a portal. At this time, the first level of the Warflag realm had undergone a huge change. The altar-like connecting devices had all been removed. After Cyclops and the others entered, they saw a very magnificent hall. In front of the door, there were 2 diamond golems in charge of guarding, and there were also a team of steel golems patrolling around. In front of the hall was a square, and in the center was a huge purple crystal. There were also translucent crystal tubes connected together, and they could faintly see the magical energy flowing through them. Soren had really put in a lot of effort this time. He directly used the power of the divinity to change the size of the space. It was as if he had used his divine power to create the hall out of thin air. With a large number of skill points invested in alchemy, Soren's mastery of alchemy had improved by leaps and bounds. Soon, he grafted an energy channel and connected it to the elemental furnace. Huh? Why is everything here different from the last time? This time, there seemed to be a guy who had been here before, and he seemed to be called Jack. Cyclops listened to the voice not far away, and then followed the golem's guidance into the hall. As soon as they entered the hall, they saw neat rows of, how should they describe it? There were rows of neatly arranged things that looked like stone coffins with translucent crystal lids on top. Now, what the golem wanted them to do was to lie down inside. Can I enter the trial field by lying in it? Cyclops looked at everything in front of him and murmured to himself. Everything here was full of magic. There were huge crystal chandeliers, lavender magic energy pipes, and the diamond golem who was responsible for guarding looked at everyone with oppressive eyes. There were strange runes engraved on the walls, but they didn't know what they were for. The soldiers of Mordor were used to obeying orders. Although they were a little uncomfortable with everything in front of them, soon some people obeyed and lay down inside the stone coffin. Cyclops was not in a hurry. He had been paying attention to those who entered first. When the first batch of people lay down inside, the crystal glass on the stone coffin automatically closed together, and then a flickering light spot lit up at the end of the stone coffin. Then the people inside became motionless. It looked like they had fallen into a deep sleep. Only their chests rose and fell with their breathing. Did I enter the illusion of the trial just like that? Cyclops thought for a while. After seeing the people around him enter one after another, he also chose a stone coffin and lay down inside. Compared to others, Cyclops, who was a little nervous, did not immediately fall asleep. It took him a while to feel tired. After not deliberately resisting, he soon fell into a deep sleep. A faint red light flashed. When the one-eyed dragon opened his eyes after letting go of his mind and falling into a deep sleep, he was already under a blood-red sky. Hey! You despicable human! What are you doing here? The devils are about to attack the city. Why aren't you fighting? Paw! The whip cracked loudly. Before the one-eyed man could react, he was whipped on the head. When he turned around, he immediately saw a ferocious-looking lustful demon urging him to join the battle. Incredible. Although he was whipped, the one-eyed man's expression was very pleasantly surprised at this moment. P.S. Tomorrow. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.